Ethan opened his eyes and saw the ceiling. Not his own ceiling. Not the ceiling of his rented apartment in Seoul with the lightning-shaped crack. This ceiling was made of white stone with golden veins. A canopy of dark blue silk hung above it. His hands were not his own. Slender, pale, with blue veins visible beneath the skin. Ethan brought them up to his face and realized his fingers were trembling. Not from fear, from weakness. His body felt as heavy as an empty shell. His ribs jutted out beneath his nightshirt. He tried to sit up and coughed. A red stain remained on his palm. Blood. He knew that cough. He knew that room. He knew this body. Because he'd read about it last night on page 40 of a novel called A Crown of Ashes. The chapter was titled The Death That Made a Tyrant. Ethan Vale, 17 years old, the youngest prince of the Kingdom of Arcadia, sickly, unwanted by anyone, dead by sunset. He remembered this scene by heart. His older brother Dorian enters the throne room. Ethan stands by a column, a dagger between his ribs, his body on the marble floor. A single line in the novel. "I'm sorry, kid. It has to be this way." And after this death, Dorian Vale goes mad. He burns down the Crystal Tribunal. He kills 40,000 people in 3 years. He becomes a tyrant cursed by 7 generations. It all begins here, starting this morning, starting with this body, starting with the dagger his older brother is already sharpening somewhere in the castle. Ethan sat down on the bed and stared at the wall. His mind was empty and clear. No panic. Maybe because he'd spent 3 years in corporate hell, where every morning began with the thought that today he'd be fired. Maybe because he'd already been through this once before. His heart had stopped at his desk at 2 in the morning. Energy drinks, lack of sleep, a nasty comment under the last chapter. His younger brother had been torn apart over 2 pages. Worst novel of the year. He'd written that, fallen asleep, and woken up here. In the body of that very same younger brother, a blue panel flashed before his eyes, semi-transparent. It hung in the air like a hologram. The text was clear. Daily task number 1. Stay alive until sunset. Reward: 1 extra day of life. Penalty for failure: death by the rules. Ethan blinked. The panel didn't disappear. He ran his hand through it. His fingers passed right through. He looked at the window. Dawn was breaking outside the glass. A pink light fell on the stone walls of Chiron. Somewhere below, the bells signaling the morning guard shift were ringing. 12 hours remained until the murder scene. The panel flashed again. Additional task: memorize Article 7 of the Code of the 12 Pillars. Reward: plus 15 fate points. Deadline: by noon. Ethan reread the text 3 times. Article 7. He didn't remember that one from the novel. In the book, the code was mentioned merely as a backdrop. No one ever cited specific articles. But Ethan remembered something else. He remembered that in the world of Arcada, the law was mightier than the sword. That a lawyer here was more dangerous than a knight. That the Crystal Tribunal could, with a single decision, render an army powerless. And he, Ethan Pack, 26 years old, he was a lawyer, a specialist in contract law. 3 years at a corporate firm, hundreds of contracts, thousands of precedents, a memory for legal statutes that frightened even the senior partners. He looked at his slender hands, then at the control panel, then at the door. Behind that door was a castle full of people waiting for him to die. Chancellor Raymond Wallace, who had orchestrated the assassination. Lord Hamish, who had bribed the guards. A brother who believed this was the right thing to do. A father, the king, who didn't care either way. And not a single ally. Not a single person who would stand between him and the dagger. Ethan got out of bed. His legs buckled. He grabbed the canopy post and steadied himself. His body was weak. 52 kilograms at a height of 178. His lungs wheezed. His knees trembled, but his mind was sharp. His mind was working perfectly. He needed the archives, the Code of the 12 Pillars, Article 7, and he had to make it there before noon. Ethan pulled on the court doublet hanging on a chair. The doublet hung on him like it was on a hanger. He left the room and walked down the hallway. The servants averted their eyes. Not a single one bowed. Dorian's shadow. That's what they called him here. The younger prince who always remained silent beside his brilliant older brother. 5 years in this body, and not a single article from the code had stuck in his memory. The teachers had long since given up on him. His mother had died. His father didn't remember his name. The servants stole his medicine. Everyone was waiting for him to finally spare the family the embarrassment. Ethan walked down the hallway, counting his steps. The archive was on the lower level. 3 flights of stairs down, 2 turns to the right. He knew this from the book. The author had described the archive in a single paragraph. Dusty shelves, thousands of scrolls, not a single visitor in the past year. The perfect place to hide and learn the law that would save a life. He pushed open the heavy door to the archive. The hinges creaked. Inside, it smelled of old paper and wax. Dust hung in the air like a golden mist. The shelves stretched into the darkness. Ethan walked along the racks. His fingers glided over the spines of the scrolls. The first pillar, on the right of the crown. The second pillar, on the right of blood. The third pillar, on the right of the court. He was looking for the 7th. The scroll was found on the bottom shelf in the far corner. The leather case was covered in mold. Ethan unrolled it on the stone table and began to read. Article 7 of the Code of the 12 Pillars, on the inviolability of blood during coronation rites. The text was archaic, long, convoluted phrases, references to precedents dating back 300 years, but the essence was simple. Any member of the royal family could declare himself a regent hostage to another family member, voluntarily, publicly, in the presence of witnesses, for a period of 30 days. During those 30 days, any violence against the hostage would automatically strip the regent of his right to the crown. No trial, no appeal. An ancient custom, created so that brothers would not kill brothers in the struggle for the throne. No one had invoked it in 200 years. Everyone had forgotten. Everyone except for the dusty scroll on the bottom shelf. Ethan read the article over and over again. He memorized every word, every clause, every exception. His legal memory kicked in like a muscle that remembers a movement. 3 years of corporate law, thousands of pages of contracts. This scroll was simpler than any of them. By noon, he knew Article 7 by heart. The panel flashed green. Mission accomplished. Plus 15 fate points. Balance, 15 fate points. A new bonus task. Talk to your brother about your mother for 5 minutes. Reward, plus 30 fate points. Deadline, until sunset. Ethan stared at the panel. Talk to his brother about their mother. The brother who, in a few hours, was supposed to stab him with a dagger. About the mother who died when Ethan Vale was 7 years old. He didn't know if the original Ethan remembered his mother. He didn't have those memories. But the panel offered something else. The deviation shop. He could spend points. 50 fate points for a single memory of the original Ethan. He had only 15. Not enough. Ethan sat in the empty archive and thought. The clock ticked. The sun was rising. Somewhere above, the castle was waking up. Servants were setting the tables. Guards were changing shifts. Chancellor Wallace was drinking his morning tea and reviewing the plan. Dorian was putting on his dress uniform. The dagger lay in his sleeve. Everything was going according to schedule. The schedule of the book Ethan had finished reading last night. He closed his eyes. He tried to recall everything he knew from the novel about Dorian Weil. 22 years old, the eldest Prince Regent. Brilliant, uncompromising. He knew the code by heart. The court adored him. The Chancellor manipulated them. Dorian and Ethan's mother had died of an illness. Dorian had been with her on her last day. Ethan wasn't allowed in. There was a single line about it in the book. Dorian never forgave himself for not bringing his younger brother to say goodbye. A single line, on which the entire motive for the murder was based. Dorian didn't kill Ethan out of malice, out of pity, out of a twisted sense of guilt. He believed that Ethan was suffering in that frail body. That death would be an act of mercy. The Chancellor had been feeding him that idea for years. "I'm sorry, kid. It has to be this way." Ethan opened his eyes. He didn't need the memories of the original Ethan. He needed just that one line from the book. He knew enough. He stood up, left the archives, climbed the stairs, headed for Dorian's chambers. The guards at the door crossed their spears. Ethan stopped. He said he wanted to see his brother. The guards exchanged glances. The younger prince had never come here, not once in 5 years. One of them smirked. He said that His Highness Dorian was busy. Ethan stood there and didn't leave. He just stood there, thin, pale, wearing a doublet that hung on him like a sack, and he stared at the door. A minute later, the door opened from the inside. Dorian stood in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair slicked back, eyes gray and cold. He looked down at Ethan, without anger, without interest, with that same doomed pity that the panel displayed as -15. He asked what Ethan wanted. Ethan swallowed. He said he wanted to talk about his mother. Dorian's expression changed. Not much. His jaw twitched slightly. His eyes narrowed slightly. He stepped back silently and let Ethan inside. The rooms were enormous. Dark wood, heavy curtains, papers and maps lay on the table, and somewhere among those papers, lay a dagger. Ethan didn't look at the table. He looked at his brother. He said he remembered how their mother used to sing before bedtime, that her hands were cold, but her voice was warm, that she always placed her hand on his forehead when he coughed. Dorian stood by the window with his back to him. He didn't move. Ethan spoke. He didn't know if it was true. He took snippets from the novel and filled in the gaps. A lawyer knows how to piece together a story from fragments. He said that his mother had once said that her boys had to stick together, that Dorian was strong and Ethan was stubborn, and together they would be invincible. It was a lie. There was nothing like that in the book. But Dorian didn't know that. His shoulders trembled. He turned around. His eyes were red. He said that Ethan had never spoken of his mother before, not a word in 10 years. Ethan replied that he'd been afraid. He'd thought Dorian wouldn't want to listen. Silence. 5 minutes passed. The panel flashed. Mission accomplished. Plus 30 fate points. Balance 45. Relationship with Dorian. -15 became +3. New status. Who are you? Ethan left his brother's chambers. The door closed behind him. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. His hands were shaking, not from weakness, but because he had just lied to a man who was about to kill him, and because that man had believed him. And because, for the first time, he had seen not pity in Dorian's eyes, but confusion. Time was passing. There were 3 hours left until the murder scene. The panel wasn't giving any new assignments. Ethan sat in his room and thought. The plan was simple. Insane, but simple. He couldn't stop Dorian physically. His body was too weak. He couldn't escape from the castle. Guards were stationed at every exit. He couldn't call for help. There was no one to call. But he could do what he did best, invoke the law. Article 7 of the Code of the 12 Pillars, regarding the sanctity of blood. The Regent Hostage Clause. If he publicly declared himself Dorian's hostage, in front of witnesses, in the throne room, then any violence against him would automatically result in Dorian's abdication from the throne. Dorian wouldn't be able to lay a finger on him. Not because he wouldn't want to, but because the price would be too high. The Chancellor wouldn't allow it. The entire conspiracy was built on the premise that Dorian would become king. A dead Ethan was needed as a trigger for madness. But if Ethan is alive and protected by the law, there's nothing to trigger. It looks good on paper. The problem is that he had to get into the throne room, recite the formula, and do it before the dagger pierced his ribs. Ethan stood up. He put on a clean doublet. He combed his hair. He looked at himself in the mirror. A gaunt face, sunken cheeks, dark circles under his eyes. A prince sheet. He smirked. Then he walked toward the throne room. The corridors were full of people. Evening reception. The court was gathering in the hall. Lords, ladies, advisors, guards. Chancellor Wallace stood by the column on the right. A graying beard, calm eyes, hands clasped behind his back. Next to him was Lord Hamish, young, arrogant, a smirk on his face. Ethan entered the hall. No one took notice. Dorian's shadow, a familiar part of the scenery. He walked to the center of the hall. He stood at the foot of the throne. His heart was pounding. His lungs were burning. He felt like coughing. He clenched his teeth and suppressed the cough. Not now. The doors swung open. Dorian entered. A full dress uniform, dark blue with silver. A ceremonial sword at his belt. A dagger in his sleeve. Ethan knew. He remembered the scene. Dorian would walk across the hall, stop at the throne, turn to his younger brother, draw the dagger. One swift motion. "I'm sorry, little one." Dorian walked across the hall. The lords bowed. The ladies lowered their eyes. The Chancellor nodded almost imperceptibly. Dorian approached the throne. He turned around. His gaze found Ethan. And Ethan saw it. The hand that slid toward the sleeve. The fingers that touched the hilt. A second. Ethan stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but the hall was large and made of stone. The acoustics carried every word to the walls. He spoke. He said that in the name of Article 7 of the Code of the 12 Pillars, concerning the sanctity of blood during coronation rites, he, Ethan Vale, the younger prince, voluntarily declared himself regent and hostage to his older brother, Dorian Vale, for a term of 310 days, before witnesses, in the presence of the court. Silence fell upon the hall like an axe. Dorian's hand froze on his sleeve. Chancellor Wallace straightened up. His face turned pale. Lord Hamish opened his mouth and did not close it. The judges by the walls exchanged glances. Ethan stood in the center of the hall, gaunt, pale, in a baggy doublet. And he recited a law that not a single person in that hall remembered. Word for word, clause by clause, with an ancient formula that had last been spoken 200 years ago. The hall was silent. Dorian looked at his younger brother. His hand slowly dropped. The dagger remained in his sleeve. The Chancellor turned to the nearest judge and whispered something. The judge shook his head. The formula had been recited correctly. There were witnesses. The law was in effect. 30 days. Any violence against Ethan meant that Dorian would forfeit his right to the crown. No trial. No appeal. The Chancellor looked at Ethan. For the first time in 5 years, he truly saw the younger prince. Truly saw him. And there was something new in his eyes. Not contempt. Not pity. Fear. The panel lit up. Mission accomplished. Stay alive until sunset. Plus 200 fate points. Balance. 245. Relationship with Dorian. Plus 3 became plus 3. No change. No. Wait. The panel updated. Plus 3 became minus 15 became plus 3. Already accounted for. An additional bonus for publicly applying the codex. Plus 50. New balance. 295. Ethan stood in the silence of the throne room. The court was watching him. 100 pairs of eyes, servants, lords, guards, his brother. And not a single one of them understood what had just happened. That the boy who, for 5 years, hadn't been able to memorize a single article of the Codex had, in 90 seconds, outmaneuvered half a year's worth of politics. Ethan turned and walked toward the exit. His legs were buckling. Ethan woke up to a knock, quiet, cautious. 3 taps with the knuckles on wood. He opened his eyes. The room was bathed in the gray light of dawn. The panel lit up at exactly 6. 3 new tasks. First, talk to the maid Mia for 3 minutes. Reward, plus 10 fate points. Second, hide the blue vial from the Chancellor's bedroom. Reward, plus 50 fate points. Third, survive the day. Reward, plus 1 day of life. The knock repeated. Ethan sat up in bed. He said, "Come in." The door opened. A girl walked in, short, thin. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun. She wore a gray maid's dress and held a tray. On the tray was a cup of tea and a slice of bread. She had a bruise under her left eye, a fresh one. Mia Khan. Ethan recognized her immediately, not by her face, but from the description in the book. The quiet maid in the younger prince's quarters. She appeared twice in the novel. The first time was when she brought tea. The second time was when she was found dead in the hallway. She accidentally drank the poison meant for Ethan. 1 line, "The maid is dead." Next paragraph. Ethan looked at her. She set the tray on the bedside table. Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't look him in the eye. She mumbled something about "good morning" and "your highness," and she began to back away toward the door. Ethan said, "Wait." She froze. He looked at the cup of tea. In the book, the poison wasn't in the first cup. The poison appeared on the 3rd day. Today was the 2nd. But the canon had already shifted. He'd disrupted the plot last night, and the panel had warned of a correction. The world would try to put everything back in its place. Maybe the poison is already here. A day early, Ethan picked up the cup, brought it to his face, sniffed it. Ordinary herbal tea, slightly bitter, with mint. In the book, the poison was odorless and tasteless. He put the cup back down. He didn't drink it. Mia was standing by the door watching him. There was fear in her eyes. Not the kind of fear you feel in front of a prince. A different kind. Deeper. Ethan remembered his task. Talk to the maid for 3 minutes. He asked her name. She blinked. Said it was Mia. He asked how long she'd been working at the palace. She said 2 years. He asked where the bruise came from. She lowered her eyes. She didn't answer. Ethan remembered from the book. The head maid. The woman who assigned work to the younger maids. She beat those who didn't keep up. She beat Mia more often than the others because Mia served Ethan's quarters, and Ethan's quarters were considered a punishment. The worst assignment. The sheet prince. No one wanted to be with him. Ethan said he knew where the bruise came from. Mia looked up. He said she didn't need to be afraid of the head maid anymore. Mia looked at him. Silence. Then she said quietly that it didn't matter, that she was used to it, that she had a reason to endure it. Ethan asked what it was. Mia clenched her hands on her apron. She said her younger brother Han was in the slums, in debt bondage. She was saving up for his ransom. Every coin went toward that. If she lost her job, her brother would remain a slave. Ethan was silent. He knew this from the book, but hearing it in person was different. In the novel, it was the backstory of a dead maid. A line in parentheses. 3 minutes passed. The panel flashed. Mission accomplished. Plus 10 points. Mia's favor. Plus 5 became plus 15. New status. He remembers my name. But Ethan didn't stop at 3 minutes. He said he'd help her. That he'd find a way to get her brother out. Mia stared at him. No one in the palace had ever spoken such words to her. The younger prince, whom everyone considered a nobody, had just promised to save her brother. She didn't believe him. You could see it in her eyes. But something in them had changed. A tiny crack in the wall she'd built around herself. Ethan nodded toward the tea. He said he wouldn't be drinking any today. That she shouldn't try the tea from his chambers either. Mia frowned. She didn't understand. Ethan didn't explain. Mia left. Ethan was left alone. 295 plus 10. 305. Destiny points. He opened the shop of deviation. Shopping list, extend life. 10 points for 1 day. Buy a memory of the original Ethan. 50 points. Unlock a codex article in perfect memory. 30 points. Erase a scene from the canon for 24 hours. 500 points. He needed a second task. Hide the blue vial from the Chancellor's bedroom. It was poison. Ethan was certain. The blue vial. In the book, The Chancellor kept the poison in a blue crystal vial on a shelf among the medicines. It looked harmless, but its contents could kill in 3 hours. Odorless, tasteless. It was this very poison that had been slipped into Ethan's tea on the 3rd day. It was this very poison that had killed Mia. Problem: the Chancellor's bedroom was in the East Wing. Security, locks, servants who reported every move. Ethan Vale couldn't get in there. The Sheet Prince didn't go to the East Wing. If he were seen there, it would arouse suspicion. Ethan thought. He needed a way to get into Wallace's bedroom unnoticed. He recalled the castle's layout from the novel. The author had been meticulous. He described every corridor, every staircase. The East Wing was connected to the library via a service passage. The library was next to the archives. The archives where Ethan had been studying Article 7 yesterday. He could enter the archives, walk through the library, and exit into the service corridor. From there, it was 3 turns to the Chancellor's quarters. But there were guards. A personal bodyguard stood at Wallace's door. Ethan couldn't get past him, unless the guard wasn't there. Ethan opened the panel and looked at the Chancellor's schedule. The panel didn't provide that kind of information. It assigned tasks, not intelligence, so he'd have to figure it out on his own. The Chancellor spent an hour every morning in the tribunal. Ethan remembered that from the book. From 8 to 9, his bodyguard accompanied him. The chambers remained unguarded for 1 hour. It was now 6:30, an hour and a half until the window of opportunity. Ethan got dressed. He left his chambers. He went to the archives, taking the same route as yesterday. The servants paid him no mind. Dorian's shadow roams the castle. Nothing new. In the archives, he turned into the library. Dusty halls, bookshelves reaching the ceiling. Not a soul in sight. He found a service door at the far end. It wasn't locked. The corridor beyond it was narrow. Walls of gray stone, torches every 10 steps. Ethan walked quietly. His body felt light. 52 kilograms made no noise. For the first time, his frailty became an advantage. He reached the East Wing by 7:15. Too early. The Chancellor hadn't left yet. Ethan found a niche in the wall and sat down. He waited. The alcove smelled of dust and mice. His legs had gone numb. A cough was coming on. He suppressed it by clenching his fist. Any sound could give him away. At 7:45, he heard footsteps. Heavy, steady. The Chancellor walked past the niche. Ethan saw him through a crack. A long robe, a silver clasp bearing a seal. Behind him, a guard in full armor. The footsteps receded. Silence. Ethan waited another 5 minutes. Then he stepped out. The hallway was empty. The door to the Chancellor's chambers was made of dark oak, with a brass handle. Locked. Ethan gave it a tug. It didn't open. He looked at the lock. Simple. A pin tumbler. In his old life, he'd seen ones like this in the office. A key with 2 teeth. Ethan looked around. A candlestick hung on the wall next to the door. A thin metal pin. He took down the candlestick, bent the pin. His hands remembered the motion. Not from this life, from his college days. When his dorm neighbor lost his key and Ethan opened the door with a pin in 3 minutes. The lock clicked a minute later. The door opened. The Chancellor's chambers were 3 times larger than Ethan's. A massive bed, a desk piled high with papers, bookcases, and a shelf against the wall. On the shelf stood vials, green ones, brown ones, amber ones, and 1 blue one. Crystal, the size of a pinky finger. Ethan picked it up. The vial felt warm to the touch. A clear liquid sloshed inside, odorless. He put it in the pocket of his doublet. He looked around. Papers lay on the table. Ethan didn't touch them. Not now. Too risky. He left the chambers, closed the door. The lock clicked into place. He headed back. The same way. The service corridor. The library. The archives. His own quarters. The panel flashed. Mission accomplished. Hide the blue vial. Plus 50 points. Balance. 355. Ethan sat down on the bed. The vial was in his pocket. Heavy. Deadly. This poison was supposed to kill Mia in 2 days, after she drank the tea meant for him. One line in the book, a line that would never come true now. He hid the vial in a crack between the stones of the wall behind the bed. He pushed the stone back into place. No one would find it. Now, he just had to get through the day. The third task. Simple, on paper. Ethan left his chambers and went to breakfast. The great hall, a long table, courtiers, lords, servants lining the walls. Dorian sat at the head of the table. He didn't look at Ethan. He wasn't looking at anyone. He ate in silence. His face was like a mask. The Chancellor sat to his right, calm. Hamish was next to him, smiling. Ethan sat at the far end of the table, where the original Ethan always sat, alone, with an empty chair on either side. Prince, a blank slate. No one sat next to him. But something had changed. The lords were glancing at him. Yesterday's scene in the throne room. Article 7. Everyone saw it. Everyone heard it. The boy who, for 5 years, hadn't been able to memorize a single article of the code suddenly quoted a 200-year-old law, word for word. Whispers rippled across the table like a wave. Ethan ate his bread and didn't look up. He could feel the Chancellor's gaze, heavy, appraising. Wallace was studying him, trying to understand. What had happened? Where had this come from? The boy had changed overnight. Or maybe the boy had been pretending all along. Both possibilities were dangerous. Breakfast was over. Ethan stood up. He walked toward the door. Hamish blocked his path. He stood in the doorway, a broad smile on his face. He said aloud, so the whole room could hear, that the Sheet Prince had put on a show yesterday, that he'd memorized one article and thinks he's become a lawyer, that maybe he should learn one more, an article about how younger princes know their place. A few lords laughed. Ethan stopped. He looked at Hamish, a small man. In the book, he was described as the Chancellor's lapdog. The day passed quietly until noon. Ethan spent the morning in the archives. He studied the articles of the code, not because he had to, of his own free will. His legal memory worked just as it had in his old life. He would read an article once, and it would stay in his head. Structure, logic, precedence, everything that the original Ethan hadn't been able to memorize in 5 years. The body was foreign, but the brain belonged to a 26-year-old lawyer from Seoul. By noon, he knew 12 articles. Not by heart, but enough to apply them in conversation. The panel offered the precedent lottery, a weekly drawing, one random article from the code, to be mastered completely. Ethan spun the wheel. Article 34, on the procedure for proving the authenticity of documents before the tribunal. Dry, technical, but Ethan read the description and froze. This article required the prosecutor to prove that every document in the case had been created using authentic materials: pen, ink, paper, seal. If even one element did not correspond to the time or place of the document's creation, the entire document was deemed a forgery, and with it, the entire indictment would be nullified. Ethan remembered. In the book, on the 7th day, the Chancellor filed a lawsuit against Ethan through Hamish, a charge of libel. The basis, a letter allegedly written in Ethan's hand. In this letter, Ethan allegedly called on the Southern Lords to revolt. A forgery. The Chancellor had ordered a scribe to forge the handwriting, but the scribe had used a new quill, a steel quill, which had only recently begun to be imported from across the sea. Such quills had appeared in the castle 2 months earlier, yet the letter was dated half a year earlier. A minor detail. But Article 34 turned that minor detail into a bombshell. Ethan sat in the archives and smiled, for the first time in 2 days. The panel had stored the article in its perfect memory, for free, a lottery prize. At noon, he returned to his quarters. Mia was standing in the doorway. No tray, no tea. She stood there, wringing her hands. Her face was pale. The bruise under her eye had turned yellowish. Ethan asked what had happened. Mia said she'd been summoned by the head maid. The head maid had told her that tomorrow Mia was to bring a special tea to Ethan's quarters from the East Wing. Mia didn't know what was in it, but she'd been told it was medicine for the prince, prepared by the Chancellor's physician. Ethan stood there listening. Tea from the East Wing, medicine from the Chancellor's physician. He already knew what it was. Poison. But not that poison. The blue vial lay in the wall behind his bed, so the Chancellor had already discovered it was missing and had prepared a replacement. Plot adjustment. The world was adapting. Ethan had removed one poison. Another had appeared, a different path to the same death. The gravity of the plot. Mia looked at him. She waited for an answer. Ethan said she wouldn't bring him that tea. Mia opened her mouth. She wanted to object, to say she had no choice, that the head maid would punish her, that she'd lose her job, that her brother... Ethan raised his hand. He said she wouldn't bring him that tea because it was poisoned. Mia froze. Her eyes widened. Ethan said that someone wanted to poison him and was using her as a pawn, that if she brought the tea and Ethan drank it, she would be to blame. The maid who served poison to the prince, she would be executed, and the real poisoner would remain in the shadows. Mia turned even paler. Her legs gave way. She fell to her knees right in the doorway. She began to speak incoherently, that she didn't know, that they'd told her it was medicine, that she would never have. Ethan knelt down in front of her. He said he believed her, that it wasn't her fault. But she needed to do one thing. Come as usual tomorrow morning. Bring tea, but not from the East Wing. The usual one. Mint tea. The same one she'd brought today. Tell the head maid that everything's been taken care of. Mia looked up at him from where she knelt, her eyes wet, and for the first time in 2 years at the palace, someone treated her like a human being, not like an object, not like a piece of furniture in the chambers of the sheet prince. She nodded. She stood up, wiped her eyes with her sleeve, said quietly that she would do as he asked, and left. The panel flashed. Hidden quest unlocked. Save Khan. Description: Mia's younger brother is in debt bondage in the slums of Chiron. The ransom is 500 silver coins. Find a way to free him. Reward: Mia's favor plus 20. Access to hidden information. Ethan closed the panel. 500 silver coins. He had no money. The younger prince had no personal funds at all. Everything went through the treasurer. The treasurer reported to the chancellor. That route was closed off. He needed another one. But not now. Right now, he just had to get through the day. He left his chambers. He walked down the hallway toward the West Wing. That's where Leia lived. His younger half-sister, the daughter of a concubine, forgotten by everyone. She rarely appeared in the book. A quiet girl with a book. The only one in the family who would cry at Ethan's funeral. He found her room, a small one, at the end of the hallway. The door was ajar. Leia was sitting on the floor. Books lay scattered around her. Fairy tales, legends, stories of knights and dragons. She was 15, but she looked 12. Small, thin, big eyes, dark hair down to her shoulders. She looked up and saw Ethan. Surprise flashed across her face, then joy. She jumped up. She said he'd come, that he hadn't been there in a long time, that she'd missed him. Ethan felt a twinge in his chest, not from a cough. The original Ethan hardly ever visited his sister. He was ashamed, or lacked the strength. Or maybe he just hadn't thought about it. Dorian's shadow cast no shadows of its own. Ethan walked in. He sat down next to her on the floor. Leia immediately began showing him the book. a fairy tale about two brothers who saved the kingdom. She read it aloud to him. Her voice was quiet. Her words got mixed up. She was nervous. Ethan listened. He looked at her, and he thought that in the book Crown of Ashes, this girl would live on for another 100 pages and then disappear from the text.
The author hadn't even bothered to write what happened to her. He just stopped mentioning her, as if she had never existed. Leia paused. She looked at him. She said he was acting strange today, that he hadn't listened before. Ethan said he used to be stupid. Leia laughed, quietly, covering her mouth with her hand, as if laughing were forbidden. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. A heavy knock, without warning. The door swung open. A man stood in the doorway, tall, gray-haired, in a black robe with a silver seal. Chancellor Raymond Wallace. He looked at Ethan. His eyes were calm, his face expressionless. He said he'd come to speak with His Highness about his health. Leia cringed. She backed away behind a stack of books. She was afraid of the Chancellor. Everyone was afraid of the Chancellor. Ethan stood up. He looked up at Wallace. The Chancellor was a head taller than him, broader in the shoulders, 30 years his senior, unbeaten in the tribunal for 20 years, the architect of the conspiracy. The Grey Cardinal, the man who, by the book, had turned Dorian into a tyrant. And now he stood in the doorway of a 15-year-old girl's room and smiled. Wallace said he'd heard about yesterday's speech in the throne room, that he was impressed, that he hadn't expected the younger prince to know the code. He said that Article 7 was a good move, old-fashioned but effective, and that he was curious where Prince Ethan had found that article because it wasn't on the course syllabi. It had been removed from the curriculum 50 years ago. Ethan replied that he'd found it in the archives, on the bottom shelf, in a dusty case. Wallace nodded. He said the archives were a good place. There were many interesting things on the bottom shelves, and that perhaps the prince should be more careful. The bottom shelves sometimes collapse. He smiled, turned around, left. Ethan stood there, watching his back. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. The Chancellor was letting him know that he knew, that he was watching, that the archive wasn't safe anymore. Leia peeked out from behind the books. She asked quietly why the Chancellor had come. Ethan said he was just checking on things. Leia shook her head. She said the Chancellor never comes just like that. And she said something else, quietly, almost in a whisper, that she'd seen strange things. Blue little windows, right before her eyes, like light that no one else can see. Ethan froze. He turned to face her. Leia clenched her fists. She said she thought she was going crazy, that she'd been seeing them for a year now. Sometimes they appear, sometimes they disappear, with text she doesn't understand. Ethan sat down next to her, slowly, carefully. He asked what kind of text it was. Leia said numbers and words about some kind of relationship, about balance, about tasks, but when she tries to read them, they vanish. Ethan looked at her. His heart was racing. Leia saw the panels, not hers, his. She saw his system, partially, in fragments. It was impossible. The system belonged to him alone. No one else was supposed to see it. Unless... He remembered a concept he'd read about in a book, the author's seals. People born with immunity to plot correction. Around them, one could break canon without penalty. Leia was a seal. She didn't know it herself. Ethan didn't tell her. Not now. Too soon. Too dangerous. He told her she wasn't going crazy, that those little windows were real, that he could see them too. Leia stared at him. Her eyes grew huge.
Then she rushed toward him and hugged him. Her slender arms clung to his doublet. She wasn't crying, she was just holding on. Like someone who had spent a year thinking they were the only one who was crazy and suddenly found out they weren't. Ethan placed his hand on her head. It felt awkward. He wasn't used to physical contact. Not in this life. Not in his past life either. Leia let go of him after a minute. She wiped her nose. She looked at him and smiled. A real smile. The first one in a long time. The panel flashed. Leia's favor. +20 became +30. A new status. She comes to him with her books. Ethan stepped out of the West Wing. The day was drawing to a close. He'd made it through. The third task was complete. The panel confirmed it. +1 day of life. Point balance, 350. Ethan walked toward his quarters, lost in thought. About Leia, who could see the panels. About Mia, who had nearly become a murder weapon. About the Chancellor, who had come bearing a warning. About Dorian, who had remained silent at breakfast. Ethan entered his quarters. He closed the door. He sat down on the bed, and he heard footsteps outside the door. Quiet, cautious. The door opened without a knock. Dorian entered the room. He wasn't wearing his dress uniform, just a plain shirt, dark pants. His hair was disheveled. His eyes were red, as if he hadn't slept or had been crying. In his right hand he held a dagger. That very one. Ethan didn't move. He didn't get out of bed. He just stared. Dorian closed the door behind him. He walked over to the table. He placed the dagger on the table. The blade glinted in the candlelight. Silence. Dorian spoke, quietly. He said he hadn't slept all night, that he'd been thinking about what Ethan had said about his mother, about the cold hands and her warm voice, that he remembered the same thing, that he'd been trying to forget it for 10 years. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't move. Dorian said that yesterday in the throne room he'd wanted to end it all, that the Chancellor had explained to him that it would be better for everyone this way, that Ethan was suffering, that the disease would kill him in a year, that it was better to end it quickly, that it was an act of mercy. And he believed it, because he wanted to believe it, because if Ethan was suffering, then killing him wasn't murder. It was deliverance. And then he could go on living, not wake up at night to his mother's voice begging him to protect his younger brother. Dorian fell silent. Ethan looked at him, at the future tyrant, at the man who, according to the book, would bathe 3 generations in blood, who would burn down the tribunal, kill 40,000. And now he stood in a small room with red eyes and a dagger on the table. Not a monster, a boy. A 22-year-old boy whom the Chancellor had been manipulating for 30 years. Ethan spoke. He said he wasn't suffering, that he was sick but not suffering, that he wanted to live, that his mother would have wanted them both to live, that he wasn't going to die, not today, not tomorrow, not even a year from now. The third day began with rain. The raindrops pounded against the glass like the fingers of an impatient man. The panel lit up at 6 o'clock sharp. 3 tasks. First, memorize Article 19 of the Code. Reward, +20 fate points. Second, find out the name of Rose Kim's father. Reward, +15 fate points. Third, survive the day. Ethan sat up in bed. The cough had returned, weaker than yesterday but persistent. He pressed it into the pillow, blood on the fabric. His body wasn't getting any better. Illness was part of the canon. The world kept him in check. Weak, skinny, coughing up blood. A prince sheet. He got dressed, went out, headed to the archives. The corridors were damp from drafts. Rain seeped through the cracks in the old windows. Servants scurried about with rags. No one paid any attention to Ethan. In the archives he found Article 19, on the rights and duties of royalty at court. Long, confusing. The gist: any person of royal blood enjoyed inviolable honor at court. Any insult directed at them in the presence of witnesses could serve as grounds for legal proceedings. Punishment for the offender ranging from a fine to banishment. Ethan memorized it in half an hour, clause by clause. The panel confirmed it. Plus 20. Balance 375. Now for the second task. Find out the name of Rose Kim's father. Rose Kim, the daughter of the captain of the palace guard. She wasn't mentioned even once in the book. A character the author hadn't written about. But the panel knew about her, knew her name, knew about her father. That meant Rose existed in the world of Arkad.
Just outside the book, outside the canon, Ethan left the archives. He headed toward the guard barracks. Soldiers were training on the parade ground. Wet from the rain, swords clanged. Ethan stood by the wall and watched. Among the soldiers was one smaller figure, a girl, 16 years old. Short chestnut hair, broad shoulders for her height. She moved quickly, confidently. The practice sword in her hands was like an extension of her arm. Rose Kim. She was fencing with a soldier twice her size. And she was winning. Every strike was precise. Every block was on time. The soldier retreated. Rose advanced. She finished the exchange with a parry. The soldier fell to the wet ground. Rose brushed her hair away from her face. She noticed Ethan. She frowned. She walked over. She was wet from rain and sweat. Mud on her cheek. Her practice sword slung over her shoulder. She said aloud that she was surprised. That Prince Ethan hadn't shown up on the training grounds before. That, actually, the guards didn't like being watched. Her tone was direct. No curtsies. No, Your Highness. Rose Kim spoke to him as a person. Ethan recalled the description from the setting. The only one in the palace who spoke openly to Ethan without condescension. He asked her name. She answered. Rose Kim. He asked who her father was. She grew wary. She said, Captain Devon Kim, commander of the palace guard. Or rather, the former commander. He's ill. For half a year now. He hasn't gotten out of bed. There's medicine, but the Chancellor has banned it from being brought into the country. Something about smuggling. Something about a trade embargo with the southern provinces. Rose's eyes hardened when she spoke of the Chancellor. Ethan saw it. Anger. Unhidden. Not the kind you see at court. Open. Honest. A soldier's anger. The panel flashed. Mission accomplished. Find out the name of Rose Kim's father. Devon Kim. Plus 15 points. Rose's favor. Plus 15 became plus 20. New status. He's listening. Ethan said he'd help find a cure. Rose looked at him. For a long time. Without saying a word. Then she said she'd heard about yesterday. About Article 7. About Hamish. That the whole court was talking about it. That the sheep prince turned out not to be so simple after all. Ethan didn't answer. Rose snorted. She said that if he needed a bodyguard, she was free in the evenings. She turned and walked out onto the parade ground. Ethan returned to the castle. Noon. He was walking down the hallway toward his chambers when he saw a crowd. The lords were standing at the doors of the small hall. Whispers. Commotion. Ethan stepped closer. Hamish. Lord Hamish had filed a formal complaint with the tribunal. Against Ethan Vale. The charge. Slander against Chancellor Wallace. The basis. A letter, allegedly written in Ethan's own hand, in which he called on the southern lords to disobey the Chancellor and regard him as a usurper. The letter was dated 3 months ago. Signed by Ethan. In Ethan's handwriting. With Ethan's seal. Ethan looked at the copy of the complaint handed to him by the court clerk. His hands were steady. He knew this would happen. According to the book, the complaint was supposed to arrive on the 7th day. But the canon had shifted. The Chancellor had accelerated the plan. Correction. The world was adapting. Not through poison this time. Through the law. In the world of Arkad, the law was a weapon. And the Chancellor knew how to use it. The trial was set for tomorrow.
The Crystal Tribunal, 7 judges. 4 of them had been bought by Wallace. The prosecutor, Lord Hamish, the Chancellor's representative. The defendant, Ethan Vale, without a lawyer. No witnesses, no evidence of innocence. If the tribunal finds him guilty of slander, then under Article 22, the Regency hostage arrangement may be revoked by court order. Ethan will lose his protection. Dorian will be able to do it again. No, not Dorian. Dorian had left the dagger behind, but the Chancellor would find another way. Ethan returned to his chambers. He sat down at the table. Before him lay a copy of the complaint and a copy of the letter. He picked up the letter. He examined it. The handwriting resembled his own, that of the original Ethan. Someone had taken the time to forge it. Good work, but not perfect. Ethan turned the sheet over. He looked at the back. The paper was standard, palace issue, with watermarks. The ink was dark blue, a quill. He held the sheet up to the candle. A shadow fell across the paper. The lines of the letters were thin, even, too even. A regular quill would have left thickening at the curves. This pen did not, because it was a steel pen, new, from across the sea. They had appeared in the palace 2 months ago, but the letter was dated 3 months ago, when steel pens did not yet exist. Ethan placed the sheet on the table. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. Article 34, on the procedure for proving the authenticity of documents. The lottery had not been wrong. He took the scroll containing Article 34 out of the archival case he had brought with him. He read it over again. Every clause, every exception, every precedent. Tomorrow he would appear before the Crystal Tribunal, alone, against Hamish, against the Chancellor, against 4 bribed judges, and he would have Article 34, and a steel pen, and 3 years of corporate law from another life. Mia brought dinner, the usual tea, mint, just as he'd asked. She set down the tray and lingered at the door. She said quietly that the head maid was furious, that she'd asked why Mia hadn't brought tea from the East Wing. Mia said the prince had refused. The maid had hit her, a new bruise, on the other cheek. Ethan looked at her. He said this was the last time. Mia replied that she was used to it. Ethan said this was the last time. She nodded and left. Ethan didn't touch his dinner. He sat there, reading Article 34 until the candle burned out. The Crystal Tribunal was beautiful. That was the first thing Ethan thought when he walked in. Walls of transparent stone. Light passed through them and shattered into hundreds of rays. 7 chairs on a dais. 7 judges. 4 in dark robes, 2 in gray, 1 in white. Yvette Solo, 24 years old. Her face was impassive. Her eyes were attentive. She looked at Ethan the way someone looks at another when they haven't made up their mind yet. The hall was full. Lords, ladies, advisors, guards along the walls. Dorian sat in the front row, arms crossed, a stony face. Next to him, an empty chair. For the Chancellor. Wallace stood by the wall to the side, not in the center, out of sight, in the shadows, as always. Hamish stood behind the prosecutor's table, a new doublet, a gold pin, a smile, smug, broad. He was relishing it. Ethan stood behind the defense table, alone. No lawyer, no assistant, skinny, pale, in a doublet that still hung on him like a sack. The sheet prince in the Crystal Tribunal. The courtroom murmured. The presiding judge raised his hand. Silence. He declared the session open. A defamation case. Plaintiff, Lord Hamish, on behalf of Chancellor Raymond Wallace. Defendant, Prince Ethan Vale. Hamish stood up. He spoke loudly and confidently. He said he had irrefutable evidence, a letter written in Ethan Vale's own hand, in which the prince called on the southern lords not to the chancellor. He called the chancellor a usurper. He called for a rebellion. This is slander, an insult to his honor, a violation of Article 22. If the tribunal finds him guilty, the regency, held hostage under Article 7, is subject to revocation. Hamish took out the letter, unfolded it, it, showed it to the courtroom. Signed by Ethan Vale. Ethan Vale's handwriting, his personal seal. He handed the letter to the presiding judge. The judge examined it, nodded, passed it to the other judges. The 4 who had been bribed confirmed its authenticity without even looking at it. The 2 neutral judges examined it carefully. Yvette was the last to take the letter. She held it for a long time. She examined it. She turned it toward the light. She placed it on the table. She didn't say a word. The presiding judge turned to Ethan. He asked what he had to say in his defense. The room watched. 100 pairs of eyes.
Hamish smiled. The chancellor stood by the wall. Dorian didn't move. Ethan stood up. He cleared his throat. A red dot remained on his palm. He wiped his hand on his doublet, and he began to speak. Quietly, calmly, just as he used to speak at meetings at the corporate law firm when the senior partner was yelling and the junior attorney had to respond with facts. He said he was asking the tribunal to take note of Article 34 of the Code of the 12 Pillars regarding the procedure for verifying the authenticity of documents, paragraph 2, clause 4, regarding the prosecutor's obligation to confirm that all elements of the document correspond to the stated date of creation. Silence. Hamish stopped smiling. He didn't know Article 34. The bribed judges exchanged glances. 2 neutral ones leaned forward. Yvette. Yvette tilted her head slightly, a micro-movement. Interest. Ethan continued. He said the letter was dated 3 months ago, the 4th month of the year 232 according to the Arcadian calendar. He asked the tribunal to pay attention to the lines of the letters. Thin, even, no thickening at the curves, characteristic of a steel nib. He said that steel nibs had begun to be supplied to the kingdom from overseas provinces and that the first shipment had arrived in the capital 2 months ago, the 6th month, and the letter is dated the 4th month. He asked the tribunal to answer a simple question. How is it possible to write a letter with a steel nib 2 months before steel nibs appeared in the country? Silence. Absolute silence. Hamish opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He said nothing. The chancellor, standing by the wall, stood up straight, hands behind his back, not a single facial expression. But Ethan saw it. The knuckles of his fingers had turned white. Ethan didn't stop there. He said that according to Article 34, paragraph 3, if even a single element of a document does not correspond to the stated date of creation, the document is deemed a forgery. And according to paragraph 4, if the prosecutor has presented a document to the court that is known to be a forgery, the charges are dismissed in their entirety, and the prosecutor is liable for false accusation. The courtroom buzzed. Whispers, movement. The lords exchanged glances. The ladies whispered among themselves. Dorian, in the front row, turned his head toward Wallace. For the first time in 3 days, he looked at the chancellor. He looked at him differently. The presiding judge turned to Hamish. He asked what he had to say. Hamish stood behind the table, pale, his mouth open. His eyes darted around the room. He was looking for help. He looked at Wallace. The chancellor didn't move. He didn't nod. He gave no signals. Hamish was alone. He began to speak haltingly. That the pen might have been old. That perhaps he had gotten the date wrong. That perhaps the letter had been written later. Ethan replied calmly. If the letter was written later, then the date is fake. And a forged date constitutes forgery. Article 34, paragraph 2. Hamish fell silent. The presiding judge consulted with the others. The 4 bribed judges tried to stall. One said a pen analysis was needed. Another said they needed time to verify it. Yvette spoke up, for the first time during the entire hearing. Her voice was steady, cold. She said that Article 34 does not require an expert analysis. The article requires the prosecutor to prove authenticity. If the prosecutor cannot prove it, the document is deemed forged by default. This is the precedent from the year 198, Markov versus the Crown. She quoted the ruling from memory, word for word. 2 neutral judges nodded. One of the 4 bribed judges looked away. He couldn't argue with the precedent, not in public, not in front of a full courtroom. The presiding judge announced the ruling. The letter was deemed a forgery. The charge of libel was dropped. Lord Hamish was charged with false accusation.
The hearing was set for 3 days later. The courtroom erupted, not with shouts, with whispers, but the whispers of 100 people sound like a storm. With the NTS sheet had just destroyed the Chancellor's protege in the Crystal Tribunal. In 10 minutes, with a single article, with a single pen. Hamish stood behind the table, pale, his hands were shaking. He looked at Wallace. The Chancellor was already leaving. His back was straight, his stride was steady, not a single glance back. Hamish was left alone. Ethan stood at the defense table. He coughed into his fist, wiped away the blood. He looked at Yvette. She was looking at him.
For the first time during the hearing, her expression changed. Not a smile, not approval, recognition. She saw what she wanted to see, someone worth betting on. The panel lit up, mission accomplished. The trial wasn't on the daily task list, but the panel counted it. A bonus for defending in the tribunal, plus 150 fate points. Balance, 540. Yvette's favor, 0 became plus 12. New status. For the first time in 20 years, young Vale was in the tribunal. Dorian approached Ethan after the trial. In the hallway, silently, he stood beside him. Then he said one sentence. He said he didn't know Ethan was capable of that. Ethan replied that there hadn't been a reason before. Dorian looked at him. For a long time, something was changing in his eyes, slowly, like ice melting in the sun. He nodded. He left. Ethan stood in the hallway. Lords were passing by. Some nodded to him. For the first time, one stopped, introduced himself, a lord from the Western Province. He said he wanted to discuss a matter, a legal one. Another invited him to dinner. A third simply watched with interest. The Sheet Prince was beginning to take on a new name. Ethan returned to his chambers. Mia was standing by the door. She curtsied, deeply, for the first time. She had heard it too. The whole castle had heard it. Ethan went inside. He sat down on the bed. He closed his eyes. His body ached. A cough raged inside him. He had no strength left. But his mind was clear. Hamish was destroyed. The Chancellor's first layer of defense had been breached. Wallace had lost a pawn. And he'd lost it in public. In front of the court. In front of the judges. In front of Dorian. Now Wallace would be angry. And an angry chancellor is a dangerous chancellor. Ethan knew this from the book. When Wallace was angry, he didn't shout, he didn't threaten. He acted. Quietly, precisely, deadly. The next blow won't come through the court. The next blow will be physical. Ethan looked at the wall behind the bed. A blue vial and a dagger. 2 trophies. And the panel flashing a new notification. The precedent lottery. A new drawing would be available in 4 days. Ethan lay down. His body craved sleep. He closed his eyes and sank into the darkness. And in his dream, he heard a voice. Not Dorian's, not Wallace's, not Mia's. Another one. Distant. Cold. Like the wind through an empty room. The voice said he was ruining everything, that the story was going in the wrong direction, that there should be blood on page 40, that there should be a tyrant, that there should be tragedy, that it was written that way, and that's how it should be. Ethan woke up. He sat up in bed. Sweat, cold, running down his back, down his face. The panel glowed red. Warning! Second-level anomaly detected. Plot correction intensified. Probability of physical correction high. Ethan wiped his face. His hands were shaking. The voice from his dream was real. He knew it. He could feel it. It wasn't a dream. It was a warning. The author, the entity who wrote Crown of Ashes, who created this world, this story, this tragedy, and who didn't like that a character was rewriting her book. Ethan stood up. He walked over to the window. Dawn. The 4th day. 26 days until the end of the regent's captivity. He looked at the panel. New tasks in an hour. And somewhere in the castle, the Chancellor was already preparing the move. And somewhere beyond this world, the author was editing the text. Ethan coughed. No blood. For the first time.
The 5th day began with blood, not his. Ethan woke up to a scream in the hallway, a woman's, short, cut off mid-word. He jumped out of bed. His body swayed. His head spun. He grabbed the canopy post. He steadied himself. The panel lit up. 6 o'clock sharp. 3 tasks. First, save a person before noon. Reward, plus 40 fate points. Second, find an ally in the slums. Reward, plus 30 fate points. Third, survive the day. Ethan pulled on his doublet and ran out into the hallway. A woman was lying against the wall. A maid. Not Mia. Another one. Older. Bigger. The head maid. The very one who had beaten Mia. She was lying on her side, gasping for breath. Her face was gray. Her lips were blue. A broken cup lay nearby on the floor. A dark liquid on the stones. The smell of mint. And something else. Something sweet. Poison. Ethan crouched down beside her. He felt her pulse. Weak. Rapid. The woman was dying. He looked around. The hallway was empty. It was early morning. The servants weren't awake yet. The guards were at the other end of the wing. No one was there. Ethan remembered. A blue vial had been tucked into the wall behind his bed. He'd stolen it 2 days ago. The Chancellor had prepared a replacement, a new poison, through the maid. But the maid had drunk it herself. A coincidence. Or a correction. The world was trying to kill someone. If not Ethan, then whoever was nearby. The gravity of the plot. The poison was meant to find a victim. Ethan didn't love that woman. She beat Mia, left her with bruises, forced her to drink poison tea, but she was lying on the floor, dying, and the panel said, "Save the person before noon." Ethan ran, not to the castle physician. The castle physician answered to the Chancellor. He ran to his own place. He opened the shop of deviations. He scrolled through the list. A general-purpose antidote. Cost, 80 fate points. Neutralizes the effects of most poisons within an hour of poisoning. Single use. He had 540 points. He bought the antidote. A small white pellet appeared in his palm, the size of a pea. Warm. Ethan ran back. The maid was still breathing, barely. He pried her jaw open. He placed the ball in her mouth. He pressed her lips together. The woman swallowed convulsively. Ethan sat down beside her and waited. After a minute, her ragged breathing evened out. After 3 minutes, the color began to return to her face. Gray gave way to white. White turned pinkish. Her lips turned pink. She opened her eyes. They were cloudy, confused. She saw Ethan. She tried to stand up. She couldn't. Ethan told her to lie down, not to move. He'd call for help. She grabbed his sleeve. Her hand was weak. Her fingers were trembling. She said hoarsely that they'd given her a cup. They told her to take it to the prince. She decided to try it first, out of habit. The head maid always tasted it before serving it, and the taste seemed strange. And then, darkness. Ethan was looking at her, the woman who had beaten Mia, who had left her with bruises, who had forced her to carry poison, had just saved his life, without knowing it, without wanting to, just out of habit. He stood up. He called for the guards. 2 soldiers ran in. They saw the maid on the floor. Ethan said she'd fallen, that she wasn't feeling well, that a healer was needed. He didn't mention the poison, not yet. The guards carried her away. Ethan stood in the hallway and looked at the broken cup. The dark liquid was seeping into the stone. The minty scent was fading. Parnell blinked. Mission accomplished. Save a person before noon. Plus 40 points. Balance, 500 exactly. Minus 80 for the antidote. Plus 40 for the mission. Ethan returned to his quarters. He sat down on the bed. His hands were shaking, not from weakness, from rage. The Chancellor had sent the poison through the maid. Again. A different poison. A different method. The same result. Someone was supposed to die this morning. Either him or the maid. The world wouldn't let him go. The gravity of the plot was pulling everything back toward the cannon. Ethan clenched his fists. He needed help. Not legal help. Physical help. Medical help. Someone who knew about poisons. someone who didn't answer to the Chancellor. He remembered the second mission, find an ally in the slums. Dana Pack, a street doctor, cynical, rude, smokes a pipe, treats patients for free. In the book, she appeared in Chapter 8 and died in the plague. A minor character, just one line, but her last name was Pack, just like Ethan's in his past life. The great-granddaughter of one of the previous time travelers. Traces of the system ran in her blood. She'd be the first to notice his panel. Ethan knew where to find the slums. The author had described them in detail in the book. The southern quarter of Kairen, beyond the market square. Narrow streets, rotting houses, open ditches, a stench that wouldn't go away. Nobles didn't go there. The guards didn't go there. Ethan couldn't go alone. His body was too weak. The streets were too dangerous. He needed protection. He remembered. Rose. She'd said she was free in the evenings, but now it was morning. Ethan left his chambers. He headed for the barracks. Rose was on the parade ground, training, alone. A wooden sword struck a post, once, twice, 3, rhythmically, precisely. She saw him, stopped, came over. Her hair was wet with sweat. Her breathing was steady. She asked what was wrong. Ethan said he needed to go to the slums, today, right now. Rose raised an eyebrow. She asked why the prince needed to go to the slums. Ethan said he needed a doctor, not a court physician, a real one. Rose looked at him for a long time. Then she said she knew the slums, that her father used to take the guards there on patrol when he could still walk, that she'd go with him. But he needed to change his clothes. He wouldn't make it more than 2 blocks in the prince's doublet. 20 minutes later, they left the castle through a side gate. Ethan was wearing a plain shirt and pants, a hooded cloak. Rose was wearing a leather jacket, a real sword at her belt, not a training sword, a steel one. The slums began beyond the market square. The smell hit them first, rot, dampness, smoke. The streets were narrow, houses made of gray wood, leaky roofs. Children sat on doorsteps, skinny, dirty. Their eyes were large and empty. Ethan walked and looked around. In the book, the slums were described in a single paragraph, a backdrop for the plague, a setting for mass deaths. Up close, it was different. Up close, they were people. Rose walked ahead, her hand on her sword, her eyes scanning the street. 2 men by the wall looked at them. They saw the sword. They looked away. Ethan asked Rose if she knew a healer named Dana Pack. Rose stopped. She turned around. She said that Dana Pack knew everyone in the slums, and everyone knew Dana Pack. The 3rd house from the well. Red door. They found the house. Small, crooked. The red door was peeling down to pink. Ethan knocked. Silence. He knocked again. The door swung open. A woman stood in the doorway, 22 years old, short, wiry, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, a pipe between her teeth. Smoke curled around her face. Her eyes were sharp, piercing. She looked Ethan up and down, then Rose, then Ethan again. She said she didn't see patients in the morning, that they should come after lunch, and that if it was a toothache, he should go to the butcher 2 houses down. He pulls teeth for a penny. Ethan said he wasn't there for his teeth, that he'd come to talk. Dana took a long drag on her pipe. She exhaled the smoke. She said that conversations cost more than teeth. Ethan said who he was. Ethan Vale, the younger prince. Dana's expression didn't change. She looked at his clothes, at his thin arms, at his sunken cheeks. She said that for a prince, he looked like crap. Ethan said he knew. Dana looked at Rose. Rose nodded. She confirmed it. Dana stepped back from the door. She let them in. Inside, the house was cramped. 1 table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with jars, herbs, powders, liquids, the smell of medicine and tobacco. Instruments lay on the table, knives, needles, bandages. clean, neat.
Dana was rough around the edges, but not sloppy. Ethan sat down on a chair. Dana sat across from him, a pipe clenched between her teeth. She asked what he wanted. Ethan said he needed someone who knew about poisons. Dana raised an eyebrow. She said she knew about them, that in the slums, poisons are part of life. Rat-based, plant-based, mineral-based. She treated all of them. Ethan pulled a handkerchief out of his pocket. There was a dark stain on the handkerchief, the liquid he'd collected from the hallway floor that morning, remnants from a broken cup. He handed it to Dana. She took the handkerchief. She sniffed it, held it up to the light, rubbed it between her fingers. Her expression grew serious. The pipe went out. She said it wasn't rat poison or plant-based poison, that it was a rare concoction, very expensive, made from seaweed from the southern islands, kills in 3 hours, odorless, almost tasteless, slightly sweet. An antidote exists, but costs a fortune. Ethan listened. Seaweed, southern islands, expensive poison, not the one stored in the blue vial, a different one. The Chancellor had found a replacement, and the replacement was more expensive and more dangerous. He asked Dana if she could make an antidote. Dana looked at him. She said she could, if she had the ingredients. She needed the same kind of seaweed from the southern islands. And one more thing, the root of a herb that grows only in the palace garden, gentian. Ethan nodded. The palace garden. He could get it. Dana said she'd take silver for the job. 20 coins. Ethan said that he didn't have any silver. Dana shrugged. She said that in that case, the conversation was over. Ethan was silent for a moment. Then he said he knew about Mia's brother, about Han, that he was a debt slave, that Mia was saving up for his ransom, that Dana was treating him for free. Dana froze, the phone in her hand. Her eyes narrowed. She asked how he knew. Ethan said that Mia had told him, and that he was going to get Han out, but he needed help. He needed someone in the slums, someone they trusted, someone who knew the streets, someone who could warn them in time if the plague broke out. Dana dropped the phone. She picked it up. She said he was a strange prince, that princes don't usually go to the slums or talk about the plague. Ethan said he was an unusual prince. Dana snorted. She was silent for a long time. Then she said she'd make the antidote without money, but in exchange for a favor, whenever he asked. Ethan agreed. The panel flashed. Mission complete. Find an ally in the slums. Plus 30 points. Dana's favor. -5 became +10. New status. She agrees to treat his cough. Ethan and Rose returned to the castle by lunchtime. Mia was standing in the hallway outside Ethan's chambers, pale, distressed. She said the head maid was in the infirmary, that the physician said it was poisoning, that the whole castle was talking about it, that the Chancellor had come to see the physician in person. He whispered something. After that, the physician announced that the maid had been poisoned by mushrooms. An accident. Ethan nodded. Mushrooms. Of course. The Chancellor had swept the matter under the rug. Mia looked at him. She asked quietly if he had saved the maid. Ethan said yes. Mia said the maid had been beating her for 2 years, every day. Ethan said he knew. Mia said he had saved her anyway. Ethan didn't answer. Mia bowed, deeply. She said one word quietly. Ethan. Not your highness. Ethan. For the first time, the panel flashed. Mia's favor. The 6th day. The panel woke him up earlier. At 5:40, a red flash. Urgent notification. Plot correction. Event in 4 hours. Assassination attempt. Target, Ethan Vale. Location, West Wing Corridor. Method, 3 mercenaries. Ethan sat up in bed. 4 hours. West Wing Corridor. That's where Leia lived. He would have to walk past her room. According to a schedule that had already been established over the past 6 days, every evening he visited Leia. Every evening he walked down that hallway. Someone had studied his habits. Someone had set up an ambush. At exactly 6 o'clock the missions lit up. First, warn Rose Kim by 9 in the morning. Reward, plus 20 destiny points. Second, learn Rose's father's name and say it out loud in front of her. Reward, plus 25 destiny points. Third, survive the day. Ethan got dressed. He went out. He headed for the barracks. Quickly, Rose was already on the parade ground. As always, a wooden sword, a pole, strike after strike. Ethan approached. Rose stopped. She looked at his face. She asked what was wrong. Ethan said he would be attacked tonight in the West Wing. 3 mercenaries. Rose wasn't surprised. She didn't ask how he knew. She just nodded. She said she'd be there. The panel flashed. Mission complete. Warn Rose, plus 20 points. Ethan spent the day in the archives. He studied the files. He was preparing not for the fight, but for what would come after it.
If the mercenaries were caught, evidence would be needed. Who hired them? Who paid them? A trail leading to the Chancellor. But Ethan knew that Wallace left no traces. In the book, the mercenaries were dead within an hour of the job. Poison in a tooth. Standard practice. The dead don't talk. So he had to make sure the mercenaries didn't die. Ethan went into the shop. He found an item, the interrogation seal. Cost 100 points. Description: a magical mark that prevents the wearer from taking their own life for 12 hours. Single use. Requires physical contact. Expensive. But if a mercenary survives and talks, the trail will lead to Wallace. Ethan bought one seal. His balance dropped. 495 minus 100. 415. Plus 20 for the mission. 435. Evening. Ethan was walking down the corridor of the West Wing, alone. Torches burned every 10 steps. Shadows fell across the walls. Leia's door was at the end of the corridor, just past the turn. He didn't make it to the turn. 3 figures stepped out of niches in the wall, all at once. Black cloaks, hoods, short swords. Professionals. Not a word. No warning. The first one lunged forward. Ethan stepped back. He stumbled. He fell onto the stone floor. The sword sliced through the air above his head. If he hadn't stumbled, the blade would have cut through his throat. The second one came in from the side. The third one circled around from behind. Ethan lay on the floor, skinny, helpless. His heart was pounding. His body wouldn't obey him. The first one swung again. And at that moment, Rose stepped out of the shadows behind the column. She didn't shout. She didn't warn them. The steel sword traced an arc and struck the first mercenary in the side, flat. He doubled over. Rose spun around. The second mercenary attacked. She blocked. She parried. She counterattacked. Blades clanged in the narrow corridor. The echoes bounced off the walls. The third mercenary turned away from Ethan toward Rose, 2 against 1. Rose fought, fast, hard, without any wasted movements. But there were 2 of them.
And they were professionals. The second mercenary got the better of her. The blade sliced across her forearm. Blood. Rose hissed. She didn't stop. She struck back. The second mercenary flew into the wall. The third was closing in. Rose stepped back. She stepped on her cloak. She stumbled. For a second, she was exposed. The third mercenary swung his blade. Ethan lunged forward. Without thinking, without planning, his body moved on its own. 52 kilograms slammed into the third mercenary. The blow was weak, ridiculous, but unexpected. The mercenary lost his balance. For a second. Rose used that second. Her sword came down on the mercenary's arm. The blade fell from his hand. Rose struck him in the face with the hilt. The mercenary collapsed. The first mercenary was getting up. Rose walked over and kicked him in the head. He fell back down. Silence. 3 bodies on the floor. 1 unconscious, 2 moaning. Rose stood over them. She was breathing heavily. Blood was flowing down her left arm. It dripped onto the stone. Ethan crawled over to the nearest mercenary, to the third one, the one he'd knocked down. He took the interrogation seal out of his pocket. He pressed it against the mercenary's neck. The seal flashed blue and vanished. It was absorbed into the skin. The mercenary twitched. He opened his eyes. His hand reached for his mouth, for his tooth. His fingers scraped against his jaw, but the poison in the tooth didn't work. The seal held. The mercenary stared at Ethan in horror. Ethan crouched down in front of him. He asked quietly who had hired them. The mercenary remained silent. Ethan said the poison in the tooth wouldn't work, that he had 12 hours, that he could spend them in the castle dungeon with the executioner, or he could answer the question and get a chance. The mercenary licked his lips. He looked at the other two, unconscious. He looked at Rose, at the sword, at the blood on her hand. He said one name: Hamish. Lord Hamish had hired them 2 days ago, through a middleman in the slums, gold up front. The job was simple. The younger prince, quietly, leave no traces. Ethan nodded. Hamish, not Wallace. Hamish. A pawn he'd destroyed in court, a pawn who'd decided to take revenge on her own, or a pawn ordered by the Chancellor who thought she was acting on her own. Ethan stood up. His legs were shaking.
His knees were buckling. His body was too weak for fights, even for ones like this. He looked at Rose. She was pressing her hand against the wound on her forearm. Blood was seeping through her fingers. Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning. Ethan remembered the mission. Learn the father's name and say it out loud. He already knew the name. Devon Kim. He said he would definitely find a cure for Captain Devon Kim. That it was a promise, not just words. A promise. Rose froze. She looked at him. No one in the palace ever spoke her father's name. To everyone, he was the former captain, a sick old man, yet another embarrassment the court preferred to forget. And this gaunt prince stood in a pool of blood, his knees trembling, and promised to save her father. Rose blinked, quickly. She turned away, wiped her eyes with the back of her good hand, turned back. Her eyes were wet. Her jaw clenched. She said that from this day forward, she was taking him under her personal protection. That she would be by his side, always. That no one would ever approach him with a sword again. The panel lit up. Mission accomplished. Say the name. Father Rose's name. Plus 25 points. Rose's favor. Plus 20 became plus 35. New status, taking him under her personal protection. Ethan helped her bandage her arm. He tore off the sleeve of her camisole. He wrapped it around the wound. Her hands were shaking. It turned out crooked. Rose snorted. She said he was worse at bandaging than he was at quoting the codex. Ethan coughed. Not from illness, from laughter. The door at the end of the hallway opened. Leia peeked out. She saw the bodies on the floor. Blood. Rose with her arm bandaged. Ethan on his knees. Her eyes grew wide. She rushed toward him, threw her arms around him, pressed herself against him. She was trembling. Ethan hugged her with one arm. With the other, he held on to the wall to keep from falling. He said everything was fine, that it was all over now. Leia wouldn't let go. 3 mercenaries lay on the floor. The guards arrived 5 minutes later. They took the mercenaries away. The third one, bearing the seal of interrogation, was sent to the basement. Ethan wrote a brief statement for the guards, an attempt on the life of a member of the royal family. Article 11 of the Code, a serious crime. An investigation is mandatory. Dorian arrived an hour later. He burst into Ethan's chambers. His eyes were wild. His hair was disheveled. He said he'd been briefed. About 3 mercenaries, about the sword. He looked at Ethan, at the whole of Ethan, at the living Ethan. Something in his face had snapped. Not a mask, a wall. A wall behind which his 22-year-old older brother had hidden everything he felt. He stepped toward Ethan, stopped, his hands clenched into fists. He said he would find out who did it. Ethan said he'd already found out. Hamish. The mercenary named him. Dorian turned and walked out. His steps were quick, heavy. Ethan knew where he was going. To Hamish. The panel flashed. Relationship with Dorian, +12 became +18. Day 7. A quiet morning. The panel lit up at 6. 3 tasks. First, visit Yvette solo at the tribunal before noon. Reward, +30 fate points. Second, retrieve a gentian root from the palace garden. Reward, +15 fate points. Third, survive the day. Ethan stood up. His cough was weak. No blood. The 4th day without blood on his palm. His body was changing. He could feel it. Not strength, but resilience. His legs didn't give way. His hands hadn't trembled since morning.
The doublet still hung on him, but no longer like a sack, more like a cloak. Rose was sleeping by the door, sitting with her back to the wall, a sword on her lap. Ethan slipped out quietly. He didn't want to wake her. He headed for the palace garden. It was early morning. The gardeners hadn't arrived yet. The garden was large. Behind the eastern wall, flower beds, fruit trees, a medicinal herb garden in the far corner, gentian, a herb with yellow flowers, a bitter root. Ethan found it based on the description in a botanical scroll he'd read in the archives between articles from the codex. He dug up 3 roots. He wrapped them in a handkerchief. The panel flashed. Mission accomplished. +15 points. He returned to the castle. He hid the roots in his chambers. Later, he'd send them to Mia. Mia would pass them on to Dana. Dana would make the antidote. The chain. Now the tribunal. Yvette solo. He walked through the corridors, thinking. Yvette was the key. The only judge out of 7 who hadn't been bought. The only one who had supported him at the trial. She had an archive of Wallace's violations spanning 20 years. She was waiting to see whom to support. Ethan was supposed to be that someone. The Crystal Tribunal was empty that morning. There were no hearings. The chambers glowed with soft morning light. The transparent walls refracted the sun. Ethan climbed the stairs to the judges' offices. A long hallway, 7 doors, 7 nameplates. Yvette solo, the last door. He knocked. Silence. Then a voice. Steady, cold. Come in. The office was small. A desk, a chair, shelves with scrolls. Not a single decoration, not a single personal item. White walls, a white robe draped over the back of the chair. Yvette was sitting at the desk. Papers lay before her. She looked up. She looked at Ethan. 24 years old, a delicate face, pale, dark eyes, not a single wrinkle. But her gaze made her look 20 years older than her years. The gaze of a person who, at 14, had signed her mother's death warrant. She wasn't surprised. She said she'd been expecting him. Ethan sat down in the chair across from her. He asked why she'd been expecting him. Yvette said it was after Hamish's trial, after Section 34, after he'd invoked a law that no one in the palace knew about except her. She realized he would come. Because smart people look for allies, and he's smart, not like Wallace, in a different way. Wallace is sharp as a knife. Ethan is smart as a lock. Ethan didn't interrupt. He listened. Yvette said she'd been watching him for 6 days, watching how he'd changed, watching how the court had changed around him. The sheet prints had started to move, to speak, to think, citing the code, winning in court, saving people. She said she'd been working at the tribunal for 10 years, since she was 14. For 10 years, she'd watched Wallace buy off judges, falsify verdicts, destroy anyone who stood in his way. For 10 years, she'd been gathering evidence. Every violation, Every bribe, every forged document, everything recorded, everything stored. She pointed to the cabinet against the wall, 3 shelves of scrolls. Ethan looked at the cabinet. 3 shelves, 20 years of violations. It was more than a weapon. It was a bomb, one that could destroy the Chancellor. But Yvette hadn't used it. She hadn't used it for 10 years. Ethan asked why. Yvette paused. She said it was because she was alone, that if she laid it all out in the tribunal, the 4 bribed judges would block it. Recusal.
Conflict of interest, procedural loopholes. Wallace knows the law better than she does. He knows every loophole, every precedent. She needs someone to stand by her side. Someone with power, someone of royal blood, someone whom the code protects by right of birth, a prince. She looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at her. Silence. He understood. Yvette wasn't just waiting for an ally. She was waiting for a weapon. A prince who knows the code and is ready to apply it. A prince who cannot be recused due to a conflict of interest because he himself is a victim. Ethan said he was ready. Yvette tilted her head. Just a little. A micro-movement, which served as her smile. She said she would start preparing the materials. That she needed a week. That when it was ready, she would let Letton know. And she said something else. Quietly, almost without inflection. That there was an article that would save his life. Article 41. On a witness's right to protection by the tribunal. If Ethan called a witness to court and the witness was threatened, then the tribunal was obligated to provide protection to any witness, including servants, including mercenaries, including people in the slums.
Ethan remembered. Article 41. The panel flashed. Mission accomplished. Visit Yvette, plus 30 points. Yvette's favor, plus 12 became plus 20. New status. She quoted him the article that would save his life. Ethan left the tribunal. He walked down the hallway. He thought. He now had an arsenal. Rose for protection. Dana for medicine and poisons. Yvette for the law. Mia for inside information. Leia for something greater. Something he didn't yet fully understand. And Dorian. Dorian, who was slowly ceasing to be a future tyrant. One relationship point at a time. Plus 18. A long way to go until plus 50, when he won't raise a hand. It would take even longer to reach plus 80, when he would die for him. But they were heading in the right direction. Ethan returned to his quarters. He handed Mia the gentian roots. He explained where to take them. Mia nodded. She didn't ask. She trusted him. Ethan sat down at the table. He opened the shop. He checked his balance. 500 points. He looked at the items. A memory of the original Ethan. 50 points. He bought one. Not about his mother. About Leia. The memory flashed in his mind, vivid, like a camera flash. Leia, 5 years old, little, dark hair, sitting on the floor in the West Wing, crying, quietly. No one comes. The original Ethan is standing around the corner, watching, wanting to go over, not going over, walking away. Leia hears footsteps, lifts her head, an empty hallway, returns to her tears. The memory faded. Ethan was sitting at the table, hands on his knees, clenched, white knuckles, 5 years old. A little girl was crying alone, and her older brother was standing around the corner and didn't come over, because he was afraid, or ashamed, or didn't know how. Ethan stood up, left the chambers, went to Leia, entered her room. She was sitting on the floor with a book. As always, she looked up, she smiled. Ethan sat down next to her. He said he remembered one day, when she was 5. The days passed more quickly. The 8th. The 9th, the 10th. Ethan found his rhythm. Mornings in the archives. Articles from the codex. One after another. By the 10th day, he knew 32 of the 140 articles. Not all by heart, but enough to put them to use. In the afternoon, tasks from the panel. Minor ones. Everyday tasks. Almost absurd. Praise Mia for the tea. Bring Leah a new book. Tell Rose that her left-handed swing has improved. Walk past Dorian and nod to him. Each task shifted the scales by 2, 3, or 5 points. Trifles, but the trifles added up. By the 10th day, Mia's favor had reached 25. She brought him tea with a smile, quiet, almost imperceptible, but genuine.
Rosie stood by the door every evening, sword on her lap, her breathing steady. She didn't miss a single night. The wound on her arm had healed. The scar remained. She wore it openly, sleeveless, as a sign. Leia came every evening with books. She read aloud. Ethan listened. Sometimes he'd fall asleep to the sound of her voice. He'd wake up with her jacket draped over his shoulders. The little girl would tuck her older brother in as best she could. Dorian. Dorian was more complicated. He didn't come by. He didn't talk. He avoided him. But Ethan noticed. Glances at breakfast. Brief, quick. When Dorian thought Ethan wasn't looking. And there was no pity in those glances. There was something else. Confusion. A question. Who is this man who has taken my brother's place? The display read +18. It didn't budge. Dorian was ice, melting slowly. On the 11th day, news arrived. A carriage from the neighboring kingdom. Selina Arcad, Dorian's fiancée, arriving in 3 days. The 14th day according to Ethan's count. According to the book's canon, Selina arrived on the 14th day and died of poison on the 16th. A poison blast at the welcome dinner. Odorless poison. Tasteless. Same type. Seaweed. Only the dose is twice as strong. Death within an hour. In the book, this was the second tragedy. The first one broke Dorian. The second one destroyed him. After Selina's death, he burned down the tribunal. He began the executions. He became a tyrant. Ethan couldn't let that happen. He called for Mia. He asked about Dana. Mia said the antidote was ready. Dana had made 3 doses from gentian roots. Enough for 3 poisonings. Ethan nodded. 3 doses. 1 for Selina, 2 in reserve. He spent the next 3 days preparing. He studied the protocol for the welcome dinner. Who sits where? Who pours the wine? Who hands out the glasses? In the book, the author described the dinner in detail. 20 guests. A long table. The Chancellor at the head. Dorian on his right. Selina on his left. Ethan at the end of the table.
Selina's glass, the third from the left, silver, engraved with the coat of arms. The poison would be slipped into the glass by the sommelier who had been bribed. Ethan had to intercept the glass, or swap out the contents. Or, he thought for 3 days, and he found a solution. Not a physical one, a legal one. On the 12th day, Ethan walked into the shop of deviations. He looked at the list. Erase a scene from the canon for 24 hours. 500 points. He had 450. Not enough. He looked at the tasks. The panel offered a bonus task, a difficult one. Deliver a speech before the court. Topic: the honor of the Vale family. Duration: at least 5 minutes. Reward: plus 100 destiny points. Ethan agreed. Day 13. The dining hall. The entire court was assembled. Dorian at the head of the table, the Chancellor to his right, lords, ladies, judges, guards. Ethan stood up. The hall fell silent. Everyone turned to look. The Sheet Prince wants to speak. Again. Ethan began to speak, quietly, calmly, without fanfare. He said that his brother's bride would arrive tomorrow, Princess Selina Arcad, that this was an important day for the Vale family,
that in recent years the Vale family had forgotten what it meant to be a family, that brother and sister lived in different wings of the castle and don't see each other for weeks, that their father, the king, doesn't remember his children's names, that his younger sister, Leia, sits alone in a room with books and thinks she's a curse. The hall fell silent. The lords exchanged glances. Dorian didn't move. His face was like stone, but his fingers clenched the edge of the table. Ethan continued. He said he wasn't going to lecture them, that he wanted to say just one thing, that the Vale family could still become a family, if each of them stopped pretending the others didn't exist. That tomorrow at dinner, he wanted to see Leia next to Dorian. Not in the West Wing, not alone, next to him. Silence. Dorian raised his face. He looked at Ethan. For a long time. Then he nodded. Once. Barely noticeably. The room began to murmur. The Chancellor looked at Ethan. Without a smile. Without a threat. With something new. Respect. No, not respect. Recognition of the danger. The panel flashed. Bonus mission completed. Plus 100 points. Balance, 550. Relationship with Dorian. Plus 18 became plus 23. Leia's favor. Plus 38 became plus 43. Ethan returned to his quarters, opened the shop, bought the erasure of a scene from the canon, 500 points. He chose a scene. Selena's poisoning at the welcome dinner. Erased for 24 hours. Balance, 50 points. Almost empty. But that meant that for 24 hours the world wouldn't try to poison Selena. The correction wouldn't work. The plot's gravity would let go of this scene. For one day. That's enough. The dinner will go off without poison. And then he'll think about what to do next. The 14th day. The carriage drove through the gates of Chiron at noon. Ethan stood on the balcony and watched. A black carriage with a golden coat of arms, a team of 4 white horses, an escort of 12 knights. The court was lined up in the square, Dorian in front, full dress uniform, a mask of a face. The chancellor behind him. Ethan came down. He stood at the end of the group, next to Leia. Leia was clutching his hand. The carriage door opened. Selena stepped out. 19 years old, tall, slender, platinum hair down to her waist, a face as if carved from marble. Cold, beautiful, icy. She wasn't smiling. She looked at the court, at Dorian, at the chancellor, assessing them like a general before a battle. Ethan looked at her, and he remembered. From the book, Selena knew she would be killed. She had come ready to die, because she had been married off to prevent her country from going to war, and she had decided it was better to die here than to live in anticipation of the knife. But Ethan knew something else. Selena had seen a fragment crown of ashes in a dream, a month before the wedding. She knew about the book. Not everything, just fragments, but enough to understand that this world had been written by someone. The welcome dinner, evening, the grand hall, a long table, 20 guests, candles, crystal, silver. Selena sat to Dorian's left. Her face was calm. Her hands rested on the table. She hadn't touched her food. Ethan was seated further down the table, but not at the very end. He'd asked for a seat closer to them. Dorian didn't object. Leia sat next to Ethan at the same table for the first time in years. She was trembling with excitement. Ethan placed his hand on her shoulder. The sommelier poured wine, glass after glass. The third from the left, silver, with a coat of arms, Selena's glass. The sommelier filled it. His hands didn't tremble. A professional. Ethan watched. The wine was ordinary, no poison. The scene was erased. 24 hours without correction. The world hadn't tried to kill Selena. Not today. Selena took the glass, raised it to her lips, stopped, looked at the wine, then at Ethan. Across the entire table, their eyes met, and Ethan understood. She had been expecting poison. She was ready to drink it. She was ready to die. And now she was looking at the wine, unable to understand why she was still alive. Ethan stood up from the table. He walked along the table towards Selena. The entire room was watching. He stopped next to her. He took her glass, brought it to his lips, and drank it. In one gulp, he set the empty glass on the table. He looked at Selena. She was looking at him. Her eyes were wide open. For the first time that evening, a crack appeared in his icy mask. Ethan said quietly that the wine was safe tonight, that he'd taken care of it. Selena didn't answer, but the crack remained. Dinner continued. Ethan returned to his seat.
Leia whispered, asking why he'd drunk someone else's wine. Ethan said he wanted to check the taste. Leia didn't believe him, but she smiled. After dinner, the hallway. Ethan was walking toward the private quarters. Footsteps behind him, quick, light. He turned around. Selena.
She was standing 3 steps away. Her platinum hair glowed in the torchlight. Her face was still cold, but her eyes were different. She said quietly that she needed to talk to him about the book. They stood in the empty hallway. The torch crackled against the wall. Selina looked at him. Ethan looked at her. The silence lasted 10 seconds. Then Selina spoke, quietly, choosing her words carefully. She said that a month ago she'd had a dream, a long one, a detailed one. She saw a book, pages, text, the title, A Crown of Ashes. She saw her own death, a glass, poison, dinner, the 16th day after her arrival. She saw Dorian go mad, saw him burn down the tribunal, how he killed thousands, tens of thousands. She woke up in a cold sweat. She decided it was a nightmare, but the details were too precise. Names, dates, places. She checked. Chiron Castle existed exactly as she had seen it in her dream.
The dome of the 12 pillars, the judges' names, the layout of the throne room, everything matched. She arrived ready to die. Not because she wanted to die, because she saw no other option. The book had been written. Her death had been written. Who was she to argue with the author? Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. He waited. Selina fell silent. She looked at him. She said that at dinner today he'd drunk wine from her glass, and it became clear to her. He knew too. He'd seen the book too. But unlike her, he hadn't come to die. He'd come to rewrite it. Ethan was silent for a moment. Then he told the truth. Not all of it, but enough. He said he knew the Crown of Ashes, that he knew every scene, every death, every page, that his task was to prevent any of them from happening, that today he'd spent 500 points to erase her death for 24 hours, that tomorrow the correction would return, that the world would try again, in a different way, with a different poison, a different glass, another killer. But he'll be ready. Selina listened. Her face didn't change, an icy mask, but her hands trembled slightly. She asked what points were. Ethan explained. Briefly, the panel, assignments, fate points, the bench, relationship scales, a system that helps him break the canon. Selina was silent for a long time. Then she said she didn't have a panel. No tasks, no points, just a dream, one dream. But in that dream, she saw something Ethan didn't know about. She saw the author. Not a voice, not text, a face, a shadow behind the pages, a figure sitting at a table, writing. And when she wrote the scene of Selina's death, her hand trembled, as if it hurt her, as if she didn't want to, but she wrote it anyway, because that's what the story required. Ethan froze. The author, with a face, with hands, with pain, not an abstract force, not impersonal gravity, a being. Who writes, who feels pain, and who writes anyway? He asked what the face looked like. Selina shook her head. She said she didn't remember. The dream was fading. Only a sensation remained. A shadow, a pen, pain, and a voice that spoke a single sentence. That's how it was written. Ethan stood in the hallway. The torch was burning out. Shadows fell across the walls. He looked at Selina. She looked at him. Two people who knew their world had been written by someone. Two readers. One with a system, the other with a single dream. Ethan said she didn't have to die. Not in 2 days, not in 20, not ever. That he wouldn't let it happen. Selina replied that those were beautiful words, but words don't stop poison. Ethan said he had an antidote, 3 doses, one for her. Selina raised an eyebrow.
For the first time during the entire conversation, something resembling surprise. Ethan took a small package out of his pocket. He unwrapped it. A dark, thick liquid in a glass vial, an antidote made from seaweed. Dana had made it from gentian roots. He held it out to Selena. She took it. She looked at the vial, at Ethan, back at the vial. She tucked it into the folds of her dress. Silence. Selena said quietly that he wasn't what she'd thought he was, that she'd thought the younger prince was a blank slate, a shadow, a plot device. Ethan said that he had been a blank space 6 days ago, and then he decided he wouldn't die on schedule. Selena tilted her head slightly. She said she wanted to believe him, but she couldn't yet. That faith was a luxury she hadn't allowed herself. That, for starters, she wanted to see him in action, in the tribunal, in the archives,
in battle against the Codex. And then she'd decide. Ethan nodded. He didn't rush her. The panel flashed. Selena's favor. -20 became -5, became +20. A spike. New status. You're not as dumb as I thought. Hidden status unlocked. Readers Union. Description. 2 people in this world know about the book. When both are in the same room, the accuracy of the panel's tasks increases by 10%. Ethan read the description. Task accuracy. That meant the tasks would predict events more accurately, that the panel would give more specific instructions, more information, better odds. Selena turned around. She walked down the hallway toward her quarters. She stopped. Without turning back, she said she wanted to look at the archives tomorrow, that she wanted to read the Codex, that if she died in this world, at least she'd die knowing its laws. Ethan replied that she wouldn't die. Selena didn't answer. She left. Ethan stood in empty hallway. The torch had burned out. Darkness. He leaned against the wall. He closed his eyes. The 14th day. Halfway through the term. 15 days until the end of the Regency hostage situation. Selena is alive.
Dorian is at +23. The Chancellor is preparing a new move. The author is awakening. Ethan has 50 points. Almost nothing. He spent it all on erasing the scene. Tomorrow the panel will assign new tasks. Tomorrow the next round will begin. He returned to his quarters. Rose was standing by the door. She raised an eyebrow. She asked where he'd been. Ethan said he'd been talking to his brother's fiancée. Rose snorted. She said the fiancé looked like an ice statue. Ethan said statues don't ask for help. Rose looked at him. She said nothing. Ethan entered his quarters. He lay down. The panel flashed one last time. Red. A warning. The scene's erasure will expire in 12 hours. After that, the correction will return, with double the force. The plot's gravity will compensate for the delay. The original goal of the poisoning will be restored. The method may change. Ethan closed his eyes. 12 hours. Then the world would try to kill Selena again, and he would have 1 dose of the antidote. 1. For all attempts. He rolled onto his side. He coughed, quietly. No blood. It had been 5 days without blood now. His body was growing stronger, slowly, but surely, as if every day he survived added not only time, but also strength. He fell asleep, and there were no dreams. For the first time in a week, the author didn't appear in his dreams. Maybe he was resting. Maybe he was preparing. Maybe he was writing a new chapter. Ethan slept. Rose stood by the door with her sword. Leia slept in the west wing, clutching a book of fairy tales. Mia slept in the servants' quarters, smiling in her sleep. Dana smoked a pipe in the slums, gazing at the moon. Yvette sat in the tribunal's office, leafing through scrolls. Dorian stood by the window of his chambers, staring into the darkness. And Selena lay in the guest quarters. She wasn't asleep. She clutched a vial of antidote in her palm. And for the first time in a month, she wasn't thinking about how beautifully to die, but about whether it was worth trying to live.
The 15th day. Exactly halfway. The panel lit up at 6. A red border, not a task, a warning. Plot correction restored. The scene's erasure has expired. The poisoning target is active. Method changed. New vector. Poison in the food, not in the glass. Breakfast. Ethan jumped up. He ran down the hallway, barefoot, in his nightshirt.
Rose right behind him. She didn't ask. She ran alongside him, sword in hand. They burst into the dining hall 3 minutes before breakfast was served. The servants were setting out the plates. Ethan ran along the table. Selina's seat, third from the left. A silver plate with a lid. He lifted the lid. Porridge. It looked ordinary. He leaned in. He sniffed. Nothing. Seaweed poison has no smell. Ethan turned to the servant who was setting out the plates, a young guy. His hands were shaking, his eyes were darting around. Ethan asked quietly who had given him that plate. The guy turned pale. He said it was the cook. Which cook? The new one. The one who arrived yesterday, last night. From the East Wing. Ethan took the plate. He left the dining room. In the hallway, he took a handkerchief out of his pocket. He wrapped up a sample of the porridge. He handed it to Rose. He told her to take it to Dana. Immediately. Rose took it and disappeared. Ethan returned to the dining room. Selina was already entering. Her platinum hair was pulled back. A white dress. Her face was icy. Ethan approached her. He whispered that breakfast wasn't safe, that she'd better not eat it. Selina looked at him. She didn't flinch. She nodded. She turned and left. No one noticed. The court was just waking up. The lords were yawning. The servants were pouring tea. The chancellor hadn't arrived yet. Ethan sat down at his place. He didn't eat. He was thinking. A new chef. From the East Wing. The chancellor had planted a new man. He'd removed the cupbearer, replaced a link in the chain, a different method, the same result. The plot's gravity worked through people, through coincidences, through replacements, like water finding a crack. Plug one and it'll seep through another. Rose returned an hour later. Dana confirmed it. Poison in the porridge, same type, seaweed, a lethal dose. Ethan nodded. For the second time. The world tried to kill Selina again, and failed again. But the attempts won't stop. Every day a new vector, every day a new method, until the plot claims its victim. Ethan couldn't keep watch over every plate, every glass, every hallway. He needed a different solution. Not a tactical one, a strategic one. He went to see Yvette. He walked into her office. He sat down across from her. He asked if there was a law in the Codex that could protect a person from poisoning. Not physically. Legally. Yvette thought for a moment. She said there was Article 52 about the royal shield, an ancient law. If a member of the royal family places a guest under the royal shield, then any attempt on that guest's life is considered an attempt on the crown itself. The punishment? Death, without trial, for everyone involved, including the person who ordered the attack. Ethan asked if, as the youngest prince, he could declare the royal shield. Yvette said he could. Under Article 52, Paragraph 3, any member of the royal family has the right to declare the shield once in their lifetime, a one-time, irreversible act. Ethan stood up. He thanked her. He left. One time only, irrevocable, once in a lifetime. He could use it now, on Selina, to protect her forever. But then he wouldn't have the shield for Leah, for Mia, for Dana, for anyone else. One bullet in the gun, for all the wars. He stood in the hallway and thought. Selina was dying according to canon. Her death was breaking Dorian. Without that death, the tyranny wouldn't begin. It was the pivotal point, the most important one. If he protected Selina, the entire second half of the plot would fall apart. The author would have to rewrite it. The revisions would be drastic, but aimed not at murder but at restructuring. Ethan made his decision. That evening, the great hall, the entire court assembled. Dinner. Ethan stood up. The hall fell silent. They were already used to it. The sheet prince speaks again. Ethan recited the formula. In the name of Article 52 of the Code of the 12 Pillars, concerning the royal shield, I, Ethan Vale, the younger prince, hereby declare Princess Selina Arkad to be under the royal shield of the Vale family. From this moment on and forevermore, any attempt on her life is tantamount to an attempt on the crown. Silence. The chancellor turned pale. For the first time in 15 days, Ethan saw fear on his face. Not feigned, real, because the royal shield meant that anyone involved in Selina's poisoning would be executed. No trial, no tribunal, no loopholes from Wallace. An ancient law, absolute. And the thread stretched from the chef to the East Wing, from the East Wing to the chancellor. Wallace understood this. Dorian rose from the table. He walked over to Ethan. He looked at him, then at Selina, then back at Ethan. He asked quietly why. Ethan replied that she was his guest and that the Vale family protects its guests. Dorian was silent for 5 seconds. Then he placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. For the first time in 15 days, he touched him. He didn't hit him. He didn't push him away. He placed his hand there and squeezed. The panel lit up. Relationship with Dorian, plus 23, became plus 32. New status. He started asking for your opinion. Selina was sitting at the table. Her back was straight. Her face was impassive. But her hands under the table were clutching the hem of her dress, and the vial of antidote that she never put away, which she wouldn't need now. The panel flashed. Selina's favor, plus 20 became plus 32. New status. It comes with it to the archive. Attention. A key scene in the canon has been cancelled. Selina's poisoning is impossible. The author is furious. The correction has been redirected. New target. Undefined. Ethan read the warning. New target. Undefined. The author has stopped hammering at a single point. Now he'll look for another. Another crack. Another death. One that will break Dorian. One that will restore the canon. Ethan didn't know which one. For the first time in 15 days, he didn't know what would happen next. The book was coming to an end. The canon was cracking, and something big was stirring behind the cracks. Something evil. Something creative. The days from the 16th to the 25th were spent preparing. Ethan worked like a machine. Morning, the archive, articles from the codex. By the 20th day, he knew 57 articles, more than any law student at Arkad, fewer than Wallace, but enough to fight. Daytime, panel assignments, points accumulated slowly, 10 at a time, 20 at a time. By the 25th day, his total had risen to 320. Evening, allies. Every day he spent time with each of them. Mia reported on movements in the castle, who was meeting with whom, who went where, who was whispering in the corners. She became his eyes among the servants. Rose trained him. Not in fencing, he was too weak for a sword. She taught him how to move, how to dodge, how to fall properly, how to get up quickly. After a week, he could run down a corridor without getting out of breath. After 2 weeks, he could dodge a blow. His body was, slowly but surely, 60 kilograms, then 62. The cough was gone completely. Leia came every evening. They sat on the floor in his quarters. She read. He listened. Sometimes she saw the panel, in fragments, blue flashes at the edge of her vision, numbers that vanished when she tried to read them. Ethan didn't explain. Not yet. Selina spent her days in the archives, studying the codex, quickly, relentlessly, with the ferocity of someone accustomed to being the best. By the 20th day, she knew 20 articles and was arguing with Ethan about legal precedents. Their arguments in the archives could be heard in the hallway. Yvette sent scrolls, 1 a day, documents from the secret archives, Wallace's violations, bribes to judges, rigged verdicts, fabricated evidence. Each scroll was a nail in the chancellor's coffin. Dana came to the castle twice, through the side gate, under the guise of a herbs. She examined Ethan. She gave him herbal infusions. His body grew stronger. The bloody cough disappeared. Dana said it was strange that an illness of this type doesn't go away with herbal infusions. Something else was healing him, something from within. Ethan knew what it was. The system, the panel. Every day he lived, every task he completed, every point of destiny infused him with the life that the canon took away. Dorian. On the 20th day, he came to Ethan. For the first time, of his own free will, he sat down in a chair. He was silent for 10 minutes. Then he asked how Ethan had found out about Article 7. Ethan replied that he'd read it. Dorian asked why he hadn't read it before. Ethan said there hadn't been a reason before. Dorian was silent for a moment. Then he asked about else. He asked if Ethan remembered the day his mother died, when Ethan wasn't allowed in. Ethan remembered. From a purchased memory. He said he remembered. Dorian said that he was the one who hadn't let him in, that he'd ordered the guards, that he'd wanted Ethan not to see it, not to remember it, that he'd wanted what was best, and he'd lived with that for 10 years. For 10 years, he'd thought he'd broken his younger brother with that decision. That Ethan's silence, his emptiness, his weakness, it was his fault. That he'd robbed him of saying goodbye to their mother and got what he deserved. A broken brother. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. His heart was pounding. This wasn't in the book. He didn't know this.
The author hadn't written this scene. It was new, alive, real. Dorian spoke. Quietly, without tears, without breaking his voice. Just the facts, like a report, like a confession in court. And Ethan understood. Dorian had been judging himself his whole life. For every decision, for every mistake. The Chancellor had exploited that guilt, twisted it, turned it into a weapon. Your brother is suffering because of you. You broke him. It's better to end it. Mercy. 10 years of manipulation. Ethan stood up. He walked over to Dorian. He said he wasn't broken, that he was alive, that he was standing right there, and that their mother wouldn't want one of her sons to kill the other just because he decided it would be for the best. Dorian raised his head. He looked at him, and Ethan saw it. For the first time. Not pity, not guilt, not coldness. Hope. Subtle, fragile, like the first ice on an autumn puddle, which could melt from a single careless step. The panel flashed. Relationship with Dorian. Plus 32 became plus 41. Dorian left. Ethan stood in the middle of the room. 41. 59 points to go. Until he wouldn't raise a hand. Close. So close. The 25th day, 5 days until the end of the Regent's captivity. Yvette handed over the last scroll. Day 26, the panel flashed red. Not in the morning, at night, at 3 o'clock. Ethan woke up. The letters glowed in the darkness. Attention. Critical correction. The author is applying direct influence. Target, Leia Moon. Method, fire. West Wing. 4 minutes. Ethan jumped out of bed. 4 minutes. West Wing. Leia. He rushed to the door. Rose sat up. She saw his face. She didn't ask any questions. She ran alongside him. They raced through the hallways. Night. Darkness. Torches every 10 steps. Boots clattered on the stone. The West Wing was at the other end of the castle. 3 flights of stairs, 2 turns, 3 minutes of running. Ethan ran, gasping for breath, but he didn't stop. His body was stronger than it had been 2 weeks ago. 62 kilograms. His lungs held out. His legs carried him. They reached the West Wing. The smell of smoke. Faint. Barely noticeable. But it was there. Ethan turned into the hallway. The end of the hallway. Leah's door.
Smoke was seeping from under the door. Rose kicked the door. It swung open. The room was on fire.
Not the whole room, the curtains. The flames were licking at the fabric. Smoke filled the room. Leia was lying in bed. She wasn't moving, she was asleep. The smoke hadn't woken her yet, but in a minute, it would be too late. Rose grabbed the blanket off the floor, threw it over the curtains, started beating at them, putting out the fire. Ethan ran over to the bed. He picked up Leia, light, small, like a bird. She opened her eyes, coughing from the smoke. She clung to him. He carried her out into the hallway, set her down on the floor. She was breathing, coughing, but breathing. Rose put out the fire in 2 minutes. She stepped out of the room. A black stain on the wall, charred curtains, the smell of smoke, but the fire was out. Ethan was sitting on the floor next to Leia. She was pressed against him, shivering. He was holding her. Rose stood nearby, a sword in her hand. Her eyes scanned the hallway. The guards arrived 5 minutes later. Ethan explained. A fire. The curtains. Cause unknown. The guards inspected the room. One said a candle had fallen onto the fabric. An accident. Ethan knew it wasn't. Leia didn't burn candles at night. She was afraid of fire. The original Ethan knew this, and Ethan remembered it from the purchased memory. Leia always blew out all the candles before going to sleep. It was a plot adjustment. The author had Leia suffer, because Leia was the seal. Because with her nearby, Ethan could break canon without penalty. The author wanted to remove the seal, remove the protection, leave Ethan exposed to the gravity of the plot. Ethan sat on the floor, holding his sister, and something inside him was changing. Not a scale, not a balance, something deeper. Anger, not hot, cold, legal, precise. The author had just tried to kill a 15-year-old girl, to reclaim his tragedy, to save the book. And for the first time, Ethan wasn't thinking about how to defend himself. He was thinking about how to attack. In the morning, he moved Leia to his quarters. He set up a second bed. Rose was now guarding both of them. Mia helped out. She brought food and books. Leia didn't complain. She sat on the floor with her books, just as always. But now she wasn't alone. The panel issued a new mission. Find the second entrance to the Order of the Ash Seals dungeons. The reward, 200 destiny points. Ethan paused.
The Order's dungeons. A secret clan of 7 families. Those who financed the Chancellor. Those who, according to the book, had provided Dorian with the Ash Crown, an artifact that catalyzed tyranny. And those in whose dungeons the bodies of the 2 previous time travelers lay. Ethan knew about the dungeons from the book. The author had described them in Chapter 9. Locked away, deep underground, a network of tunnels, halls, archives, storage rooms. The entrance was through the basement of the East Wing, through the door behind the wine barrels. But that entrance was under the Order's control. The panel instructed him to find a second one. Ethan went to the archives. He spent 6 hours poring over old maps of the castle. He found it, a drainage tunnel, built 200 years ago to drain water from the basements. Abandoned, forgotten. The entrance was through the apothecary garden in the palace grounds. Beneath the roots of an old oak tree, the panel flashed. Mission accomplished. Plus 200 points. His balance jumped to 520. Ethan didn't go into the tunnel. Not yet. That was for later, after the trial. Right now, the main thing was the 30th day. The finale of the Regent's hostage crisis. The trial. Wallace. All or nothing. Day 28. Ethan met with 2 neutral judges, one at a time. He showed each of them 3 scrolls from Yvette's archive. Not all of them. 3. The most convincing ones. One judge read in silence. His expression didn't change. He placed the scrolls on the table. He said he would think it over. The second judge read and grew paler with every line. By the end of the 3rd scroll, his hands were shaking. He said he hadn't known. That he hadn't known for 20 years. Both agreed. Not with words, with nods. Ethan had 3 of the 7 judges on his side. Yvette. 2 were neutral. The 4 who'd been bribed sided with Wallace, but 4 against 3 didn't matter. Under Article 88, a conviction requires 3 to begin with, not 4. 3. Wallace couldn't block the proceedings. He could only defend himself. The 29th day.
Ethan spent it with Dorian. He went to see him in the morning. He sat down. He said that tomorrow was the last day, that the Regency, the hostage situation, was coming to an end, that there would be a trial, and that at this trial Ethan intended to indict the Chancellor.
Dorian listened in silence. His face was stony. Ethan told him, not everything, enough, about the poison in Mia's tea, about the forged letter, about the mercenaries, about the new cook and Selena's poisoned breakfast, about the fire in Leah's room. Thread by thread, fact by fact, the lawyer from Seoul was building his case before the only juror who mattered. Dorian listened. He didn't interrupt. When Ethan finished, the silence lingered for a long time. Then Dorian spoke, quietly. He said that the Chancellor had been by his side for 20 years, that he had replaced his father, that he had taught him, guided him, and protected him, and that now Ethan was saying it had all been a lie, that the Chancellor had used him, manipulated him, pushed him toward decisions that destroyed his family. Ethan said yes. Dorian stood up. He walked over to the window. He stood with his back to it. For a long time. Then he turned around. His eyes were dry, steady. He said one sentence. He said he'd be at the tribunal tomorrow, and that if Ethan was right, the Chancellor would answer for it. The panel flashed. Relations with Dorian. Plus 41 became plus 48. 2 points from the threshold. 2 points before he wouldn't raise his hand. Ethan left. He returned to his quarters. Leia was asleep. Rose was standing by the door. Mia brought tea. Mint tea. Real mint tea. Ethan sat down at the table. Scrolls lay before him. Tomorrow. The 30th day. The 30th day. Morning. The hourglass in the great hall had been turned over for the last time. The 30th turn. The court had gathered to watch. Lords, ladies, advisors, servants lined the walls. Everyone knew that today would decide everything. The regent's term as hostage would expire at sunset. If Dorian failed to prove to the tribunal that he had taken his brother under his wing for his own good, he would lose his right to the crown. Ethan would come under the Chancellor's protection, which meant death. Everyone knew it. The Chancellor knew it. Dorian knew. Ethan knew better than anyone. The Crystal Tribunal. 10 o'clock in the morning. The hall was more packed than ever. Not just the court. Townspeople, merchants, scholars. Rumors of the plain-clothed prince who quoted the codex had spread throughout the capital over the past month. People wanted to see 7 judges on the dais. 4 who'd been bought off. 2 neutral ones who were now not quite neutral. Yvette in her white robe, her face impassive, her hands on the table, ready. Chancellor Raymond Wallace stood behind the prosecutor's table, for the first time in 20 years, not in the shadows, in the light, in the center of the courtroom. He looked calm, confident, but Ethan saw it. His fingers were gripping the pen too tightly. Ethan stood at the defense table, not alone. Selena stood beside him. She had asked for permission to be present as a legal assistant. Article 29 allowed it. Ethan agreed. Behind him sat Rose, Mia, Leia. Everyone had come. Dorian sat in the front row, alone, hands on his knees, his face as hard as stone. The presiding judge announced the start of the proceedings. The case concerned the termination of the Regency hostage situation. The question: did Prince Regent Dorian Vale act in the best interests of his younger brother? The Chancellor stood up. He began to speak. 20 years of oratory experience. His voice was steady, persuasive, every word carefully chosen. He said that Dorian Vale had failed in his duties as guardian, that Ethan's life had been threatened 3 times in 30 days, that this proved the regent's inability to protect the hostage, that according to the precedent set in the year 112 in the case of Moran versus the Crown, the Regency hostage arrangement was null and void. Ethan would lose his protection and come under the Chancellor's guardianship as the closest state official. Elegant, clean, logical. The Chancellor used the attempts on his own life as evidence of Dorian's guilt. His own attacks on Ethan became an argument against his brother. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The 4 bribed judges nodded. Everything was going according to Wallace's plan. The presiding judge addressed Ethan. The defense. Ethan stood up. He cleared his throat, quietly, without blood. He looked out at the courtroom. 100 faces, 200 eyes, silence. And he began. Not with the defense, with the prosecution. He said that before answering the tribunal's question, as a member of the royal family, he was exercising his right under Article 88, the right to indict the chancellor. The courtroom froze. Wallace sat up straight. His hand, holding the pen, froze in midair. Ethan continued. He said that 3 conditions were necessary to invoke Article 88. The consent of 3 judges. Check. Judge Yvette Solo, Judge Cameron, Judge Laurent. Yvette nodded. Cameron nodded. Laurent nodded. 3 out of 7. The consent of a member of the royal family. Check. Ethan Vale, a witness from among the victims. Check. Ethan named the mercenary from the basement, the one bound by the seal of interrogation, the one who had named Hamish. And through Hamish, the trail led to the chancellor. The guards brought in the mercenary, thin, pale, a month in the basement, but alive. Under the protection of Article 41, the mercenary spoke. Quietly, his words were disjointed, but he spoke. Hamish had hired him. The gold had come from the east wing, from the chancellor's chambers, through a servant whom the mercenary had seen face to face. The servant was standing in the hall. Among the spectators, the mercenary pointed at him. The servant ran toward the door. The guards intercepted him. The hall erupted in whispers, but Ethan didn't stop. He pulled out the scrolls, one after another. Yvette's archives, 20 years worth. He didn't read them all aloud. He picked out the key ones. 3 bribes to judges, documents, amounts, dates, 2 fraudulent verdicts, one of which had sent an innocent woman to the stake, Yvette's mother. Ethan didn't say this out loud. He didn't need to. Yvette knew. The courtroom knew. The forgery of a letter in Ethan's name, the steel pen. Article 34, already proven. Smuggling poison into the palace via Hamish. Poisoned tea, poisoned breakfast. The new chef from the East Wing. An attempt on the life of a guest under the royal shield. Article 52. Ethan spoke for 20 minutes, calmly, without shouting, without drama. Facts, articles, precedents. A lawyer from Seoul was arguing the case of his life in the Crystal Tribunal of Peace, a court that was never supposed to exist. Wallace listened. His expression didn't change. 20 years in court. He knew how to take a punch. When Ethan finished, the chancellor stood up and began his defense. 20 years undefeated. He parried every one of Ethan's arguments with a precedent. He challenged every fact on procedural grounds. He cast doubt on every scroll. The mercenary's testimony, inadmissible. A criminal cannot testify against a public official without confirmation from 2 independent sources. Article 91, Yvette's scrolls, obtained without the tribunal's authorization. Article 67 on the admissibility of evidence. The servant's testimony, given under duress. Article 44, Wallace quoted the code from memory, quickly, precisely, every article in its place, every paragraph, every clause. He had studied this code for 20 years, applied it for 30. He knew it like the back of his hand. Ethan listened, and felt as if the ground slipping from under his feet. Wallace was better, objectively, simply better. 30 years versus 3. The courtroom saw it. The 4 bribed judges relaxed. The 2 neutral ones frowned. Yvette sat motionless. Ethan stood behind the table, and he realized he was losing. Selina touched his hand, quietly, under the table. He looked at her. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Wallace. And her lips were moving slightly. She was counting the articles Wallace was citing, and Ethan realized it. Selina saw what he saw, that Wallace wasn't citing all the articles correctly. 3 mistakes, minor ones, almost imperceptible. Paragraph 2 instead of 3, subparagraph A instead of subparagraph C. The year of the precedent, 1908 instead of 1907. Trivialities, unimportant to an ordinary court. But Section 34, which Ethan knew by heart, had become his weapon from his very first trial. Section 34 stated that the authenticity of any document or citation is verified by checking the details for consistency. If a detail doesn't match, the citation is invalid. Ethan stood up, quietly, calmly, and began to pick apart every one of Wallace's errors. One by one, Paragraph 2. Number 3. Subparagraph A. No. Subparagraph C. The year 1908. No. 1907. The room fell silent. Wallace listened, and with every correction, his face changed. It didn't turn pale. It darkened. He understood. The boy was catching him out on his mistakes. Him, Raymond Wallace, 20 years undefeated, on errors in the code, which he knew by heart, but knew from 20 years of memory. And memory grows old. Details blur. Paragraphs get mixed up. Years shift. A young lawyer with a perfect memory versus an old master whose memory was beginning to fail him. Ethan finished his analysis. 3 errors. 3 invalid citations. 3 of Wallace's arguments were nullified. The rest remained. But the rest weren't enough. Without those 3, the Chancellor's defense crumbled. The mercenary's testimony was admissible. Yvette's scrolls were legitimate. The servant was a witness. The presiding judge conferred with the others. At length, the 4 who had been bribed tried to argue, but the facts were on the table. The precedents were cited correctly. The statutes were applied correctly. 3 against 4. But the 2 neutrals were no longer neutral. They had seen the scrolls. They had heard the testimony. They knew. The vote. Yvette, guilty. Cameron, guilty. Laurent, guilty. The 4 who had been bribed. 3, not guilty. 1, the 4th, the one who had averted his eyes at Hamish's trial. He remained silent. Everyone waited. He looked at Wallace. Wallace looked at him, calmly, confidently, the way a man who has had you in his power for 20 years looks at you. The judge lowered his eyes and said, "Guilty, 4-3. The courtroom erupted, not in whispers, in a shout. Chancellor Raymond Wallace was found guilty, for the first time in 20 years, the first defeat of his entire career. Guards surrounded the Chancellor. Wallace stood behind the table, upright, calm, hands behind his back. He looked at Ethan, and for the first time in 30 days, something other than coldness appeared on his face. Not anger, not fear. Acceptance. He acknowledged that he had lost, that the boy everyone had considered a nobody had outplayed him. They led him away. The hall buzzed. Lords jumped to their feet. Ladies gasped. Servants exchanged glances. Dorian. Dorian rose from the front row. He walked across the hall toward Ethan. The court parted before him. He approached, stood face to face, and slowly dropped to one knee before his younger brother, before the prince blanket, before the boy he'd been planning to kill a month ago. The hall froze. Absolute silence. Dorian spoke softly, but every word echoed off the walls. He said that Ethan wasn't his brother, that Ethan was his miracle. The panel lit up. Relationship with Dorian. Plus 48 became plus 58. New status. He won't lay a hand on you. Yvette's favor. Plus 20 became plus 55. New status. For the first time in 10 years, I want to sleep without pills. Because of you. Victory bonus. Plus 500 fate points. Balance. 1020. Chapter of the Canon. The Death That Made the Tyrant. Status. Cancelled. The evening of the 30th day. The castle had fallen silent. The courtyard had dispersed. The guards had led the Chancellor away to the tribunal's dungeons. The lords whispered in the corners. Servants ran about with news. The world of Arcade was changing before our eyes. Ethan sat in the empty tribunal, alone. The crystal walls glowed with the light of sunset. Orange, pink, gold. 7 chairs on the dais. Empty. The prosecutor's table. Empty. The defense table. Scrolls lay on it. His scrolls. 30 days. He had lived through 30 days that were never supposed to happen. On the 40th page of the book, Ethan Vale was dying. One line. A dagger. Blood. I'm sorry, kid. And after that, the world went up in flames. But the 40th page didn't come true. The boy on it survived. Because a lawyer from Seoul knew how to read contracts, and laws, and people. The door opened. Dorian walked in. No uniform, no sword, a plain shirt, dark pants, just like that night when he'd come with the dagger. Only now there was no dagger. He sat down next to Ethan. On the stone bench, silently, for a long time. The sunset shifted colors on the walls. Orange turned to red, red turned to purple. Dorian spoke, quietly. He said he didn't understand, that a month ago, Ethan had been a shadow. 5 years of silence, 5 years of emptiness, and then, suddenly, the articles in the codex, the trials, the victories, the people following him, the maid, the healer, the squire, the judge, the princess, and his sister, smiling for the first time in years. He said he didn't recognize him, that this wasn't the Ethan he'd known. Ethan remained silent. He thought about it. He could have lied, just as he'd lied for 30 days, just as he'd pieced together a story from fragments, just as he'd chosen his words carefully. He could have, but he didn't. He told the truth, not the whole truth, but the main thing. He said that a month ago he woke up and realized he was going to die, that someone had decided it would be better that way, that his death was necessary for someone else's plan, and he decided he didn't agree, that he wanted to live, that he didn't want his brother to become the person they wanted him to be, that he didn't want his sister to be alone, that he didn't want the people around him to be mere lines in someone else's story. Dorian listened. He didn't interrupt. Then he asked one question. He asked what lines in someone else's story meant. Ethan looked at him. He smiled. He said he'd explain later. Someday, when it was all over. Dorian nodded. He accepted it. He didn't press the issue. And that was something new. Dorian Vale from the book had always pressed the issue. He demanded answers. He couldn't stand ambiguity. This Dorian waited, because he trusted. Plus 58. They sat in silence. The sunset was fading. Purple turned to blue. Blue turned to black. Stars appeared behind the crystal walls. The door opened again. They all came in. Mia with a tray. Tea. Mint tea. 2 cups. Rose, with a sword at her belt, stood by the door, out of habit. Leia, with a book, sat on the floor next to Ethan, leaning against his leg. Selina entered last, stopping by the wall. She crossed her arms. Her face was cold, but her eyes were warm. Warm for the first time. Yvette appeared a minute later. A white robe, clean, fresh. She stood by the window. She didn't sit down. She never sat down when she could stand. And Dana was the last to arrive. Through the side door, a pipe between her teeth, smoke curled from it. She leaned against the wall. She snorted. She said it was quite nice for a basement. They were all together, for the first time, in one room. Ethan looked at them. The maid who was supposed to die in Chapter 3. The healer who was supposed to burn to death in the plague of Chapter 8. The squire whom the author never wrote about at all. The judge who had waited 10 years to decide whom to support. The princess who had come to die. The sister who had been forgotten. And the brother who was supposed to become a tyrant. Each of them was a line. A single line in a book called Crown of Ashes. And each of them became a person. Alive. Real. With a name. With a story. With a future the book hadn't foreseen. Mia poured the tea. Dorian took a cup. He looked at Ethan. Ethan took his. They drank in silence. The tea was warm, minty, real. Leia read aloud from a book of fairy tales about 2 brothers who saved the kingdom. Rose stood by the door and smiled. For the first time in a month, Ethan saw her smile. A broad one, an open one, a soldier's smile. Selina listened to Leia. She didn't interrupt. Her lips curved slightly. Almost a smile. Almost. Yvette stood by the window and looked at the stars. Dana smoked her pipe and grumbled that the castle was too clean. The panel flashed. Quietly. Not red. Blue. Calm. The regent's hostage situation is over. Ethan Vale is alive. Dorian Vale retains his right to the crown. Chancellor Raymond Wallace has been removed from office. The first arc is complete. And then the panel flashed again. Red. Brightly. The words burned in the darkness. Only Ethan could see them. And Leia. Leia looked up from her book. She looked at Ethan, her eyes wide. She could see them too. Attention! The author has fully awakened. Level 4 interference detected. Chapter 1. The Death That Made the Tyrant. Cancelled. The author has begun writing a new chapter. Title: Crown of Ashes. Volume 2. New goals: the Order of the Ash Seal, the Ash Crown, the Rebellion of the Southern Lords, the Plague in the Slums, a Poisoned Wedding. Time until the new canon is activated: 30 days. Ethan read it. 30 days. 30 again. The author was setting a new deadline. New threats. A new plot. Not the old canon. A new one.
Written specifically for Ethan, the author had learned. He had adapted. He rewrote the book to face a new adversary. Ethan closed the panel. He looked at the people around him, at the team, at his family, at the lines that had become people. Outside the window, night had fallen over Chiron. Stars shone above the crystal tribunal. Somewhere in the slums, Dana would return to her patients. Somewhere in the dungeons lay the bodies of 2 previous time travelers who hadn't made it. Somewhere beyond this world, the author sat at a table and wrote. A new chapter. A new tragedy. A new attempt to reclaim his book. Ethan coughed. No blood. He just coughed. He looked at his palm. It was clean. His body was healthy. For the first time in Ethan Vale's 17 years of life, 62 kilograms. Not a single attack in a week. His lungs breathed freely. His back was straight. His doublet no longer hung like a sack. He stood up. He walked over to the crystal wall. He looked down at the city below. Lights, streets, houses, people. His world. Not the one in a book. His own. Leia approached. She stood beside him, quiet, small, with a book in her hands. She whispered that she saw new words. Blue ones. About 30 days. About a new chapter. Ethan placed his hand on her head. He said he knew. That they'd manage. That the first time he'd been alone. But now there were 7 of them. Leia nodded. Dorian walked over. He stood on the other side. He looked out the window. He asked what they were whispering about. Ethan said it was about the future. Dorian snorted. He said the future could wait until morning. Ethan smiled. He turned his back to the window. He looked around the room. Rose was by the door. Mia was putting away the tray. Selena was by the wall. Yvette was by the window. Dana was the first to leave. She grumbled about the stairs. The panel flashed one last time. Quiet. Blue. Ethan Vale. Day 30. Balance of Fate. 1,020 points. Relationships. Dorian plus 58. Mia plus 25. Rose plus 35. Leia plus 43. Selena plus 32. Yvette plus 55. Dana plus 10. First arch status. Complete. Chapter. The Death That Made the Tyrant. Cancelled. Author. Furious. Ethan closed the panel. He looked up at the crystal ceiling. Through it, he could see the stars, so many, so bright, like the panel, like the system. Like a world that someone had written and that he was rewriting line by line. He remembered himself,
Ethan Pack, 26 years old, a junior lawyer, 3 years without sleep, energy companies, a scathing review. His younger brother was torn apart in 2 pages, the worst novel of the year. He wrote it, fell asleep, and woke up here, in the body of a boy whom everyone considered a nobody, and in 30 days he made sure that this boy ceased to be a nobody, ceased to be a shadow. He ceased to be a line. Ethan said it out loud, quietly, to no one, into the empty hall, into the crystal walls, into the stars. He said he could hear, that he knew the author could hear, and that he had a message, that he wasn't saving the villain, he was taking his brother's book away. Silence. The stars did not answer. The author did not answer. But the panel flashed. Once, red, briefly, like a sigh, like a confession, like the start of the second round. Ethan turned toward the door. Dorian and Leia were waiting. Rose held the door open. Mia stood in the hallway with a lantern. Selena had already gone ahead. Her back was straight. Her hair shimmered silver in the moonlight. Ethan stepped out of the tribunal. He walked down the hallway, beside his brother, beside his sister, beside the people who had ceased to be characters and had become his family. Behind him lay an empty hall, crystal walls, 7 chairs, and scrolls on the table. Ahead lay 30 new days. The Order of the Ashen Seal, the Ashen Crown, the Plague, the Uprising, an author who learned from his mistakes, and it was all ticking away, according to the schedule of the new book, which Ethan hadn't read yet, but which he was going to rewrite, just like the first one, line by line, article by article, person by person. He walked down the hallway and didn't cough. For the first time in 17 years, his body didn't ache. For the first time in 26 years of lives, he knew why he was living. The hallway led to the staircase. The staircase led upstairs, to his rooms, to the morning, to a new day, the first day after the book. Ethan climbed the steps and smiled.